Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Pirate 101 story movie. I read all of the dialogue in the main story for Pirate 101 from Skull Island to Valencia Part 2, Level 1 to Level 70, you name it. I read all the dialogue, and I have compiled every episode from my series where I started a privateer to read all the dialogue in Pirate 101 from books 1 to 15. I figured, I have a series with all the episodes that are like 15 to 20 minutes. I might as well make the one single movie episode so you could watch the entire thing through from start to finish uninterrupted. And yeah, I think that's enough yapping. Let's get into book 1. Also like and subscribe. So we start in book 1 in the brig of an armada ship, where we awake to Boochbeard and Gandry asking if we're the pirate that they're looking for. We go through the tutorial and choose a couple things like how our parents passed away, where we grew up, and what class we're going to be. And that sort of correlates to what crime we committed to get us locked up into prison in the first place. And so we go through the tutorial, we go to the top deck, we free our starter companion, who is also a prisoner on the ship. We fight Deacon and some of the Armada troops, and then we escape the ship with Boochbeard and Gandry, and then end up here in Captain Avery's office. And we talk to Captain Avery, who tells us that he will free us and give us a ship if we can do one small task for him. And what is that task? Well, he wants us to get back the Jade Amulet from Finn Dorsal, who is a cutthroat pirate who stole the Jade Amulet in an act to betray Captain Avery, is the sort of vibe that we're getting. He intended to sell it, so he stole it and is awaiting a buyer. And in doing so, he woke up and enraged the native population here in Skull Island, which we'll see in a second is the Troggies. And this kind of started a small war between the Troggies and then Captain Avery's sort of troops. And the first one we meet is Bonnie Ann, and we also meet Lieutenant Smollett here. And they tell us if we can scout out and destroy some of these cannons that the Troggies are firing, they'll be able to help us get to some of Captain Avery's other troops. Well, interestingly, after we, in part, destroy some of this native population, Bonnie Ann is like, wow, you did a fantastic job and I want to join you. Which, I mean, looking at the correlation, the parallels between Bonnie Ann from Marleybone and the British, there's no real discrepancy between those two things. So once we kind of get through this little part, we end up on the other side over here. And we see that there's a small little frog in a cage right there. That's Lxnely. And so we break him out, and then we head over here to fight our first cutthroat pirates. And then we meet up with Lxnely right here, who tells us that inside the Skull Cave, Finn is awaiting a buyer. And then we head into the cave. And to begin with, this tunnel is all flooded up, so we head over to that sigil there, and we sort of defeat some of the leaders of the native population and then drain the tunnels so that we can go ahead to a door that holds Finn where he's awaiting his buyer. How did Finn get into that room? It's not really that clear, but we kind of just ignore it. And then we meet up with Sergeant Shepard, the other of Captain Avery's troops, to sort of team up and take down Finn. Now, Finn's kind of scary. He's a big dude, but with the help of Sergeant Shepard, we take him down and return the Jade Amulet back to Captain Avery. Captain Avery, in surprise, learns that we did not swap out the Jade Amulet for a fake, and holds up his end of the bargain by giving us a ship. So he tells us to go talk to Dockmaster Dan in this little plaza area, and we see a giant ship looming over waiting for us until we talk to Dockmaster Dan. Now, Dockmaster Dan here tells us that the big ship we see on this dock is actually not ours, but the small raft behind it is. Obviously, we're a little upset, so we go back to Captain Avery and kind of give him a piece of our mind. And he lets us in on a little secret. Let's hear the story of Captain Gunn.
Captain Gunn was a legend of the Skyways, feared by pirates and princes from Marleybone to Monquista. A finer smuggler never slipped past a blockade. Gunn sailed to Mushu, mysterious realm of the samurai and the ninja pigs. And there, he made a tremendous discovery. On the cliffs of Mushu, there grows a rare and tasty delicacy, Yum Yum fruit, the most precious commodity in the spiral. That's right, Yum Yum fruit. It can cure disease, grant strength, and even restore youth. And it makes your breath minty fresh, which is nice. Unfortunately, the Emperor of Mushu holds Yum Yum trees sacred. Stealing Yum Yum fruit is punishable by death. If you get caught. Gun smuggled back loads of the stuff, and he sold it by the ton. Yum bread, yum cake, yum pudding. But his real stroke of genius was when he bottled it, and he called his creation Yum. Pirates went crazy for Yum, and everybody else did too. Gun was rich. He even trademarked the song. Whenever a pirate sings yo-ho-ho in a bottle of Yum, crafty old Gun makes a penny. When he retired, Captain Gun was the richest pirate in history. And then he died. So, where's Gun's gold?
An interesting little part about that is where the Ninja Pigs kill him in that puppet show is where we actually find him on Bounty Island once we get to there. So basically, Captain Gun is the sort of first, I don't want to say first capitalist, but he's the first major capitalist that we are aware of in Pirate 101. Because he stole a ton of Yum Yum fruit from Mushu and then monopolized the market and created a bunch of products and sold them to the pirates in Skull Island. So Captain Avery tells us that he actually has a contact in a local tavern right over here, the Kraken Skulls Tavern, that is meeting with a bunch of pirates right now using Gun's will to find this treasure and make a bunch of bank. So once we head into the tavern, we go to this little basement area, and we start to hear an argument happening around this table. We have our contact, who for the privateer is Ensign Emmett. He's saying that Ratbeard is to be just a captain of the ship because Emmett has the will. Ratbeard doesn't take kindly to this, so he starts an ambush essentially, and we're left to defend Ensign Emmett. And then Ratbeard runs away while we're off to fight the rats. And after we protect Ensign Emmett, he joins our crew, and then we're off to chase Ratbeard. So we escape this tavern. We talk to a few people on the way out, like Prospector Zeke and this little frog dude outside the entrance. Right here, Jack Scallywag. And then we talk to Blind Mew, and we end up finding them at Blood Shoals. When we arrive on Blood Shoals, we see right here, we see these footprints leading to this cave. And this is a sort of known hideout of Ratbeard and his crew, aptly named Trader's Cave. And we follow more footprints and we come up. We see some light. Oh, we see a table. But we also see 4 dead rats. It's a homicide. It's a quadruple poisoning homicide. We first speak to Lasco here. He's sort of the older brother to these 3 other rats. And he tells us that he may have a lead on Ratbeard, but in order to give us the information, he needs to be laid to rest. But the way he wants to be laid to rest is by laying his 3 crewmates to rest. And so, I'm going to be looking at my notes for this. So our first rat was Jack. He was a spy for Captain Avery, as in he was spying on Captain Avery for the Shark Clans, because the Shark Clans weren't really happy with the way Captain Avery was standardizing a sort of economy in Skull Island. And we learned that there's some sort of old ancient magic behind this sort of coup. And we end up learning that it's the shrimp, these little prawn shrimp guys that are putting on a facade of big sharks to manipulate and lead the shark clans. And essentially what we do is we stop the coup, we take down the ancient evil, and then we move on to Mo. Mo's story is a little interesting. He was engaged to another individual, and this other guy, Captain Gordon, swept his fiance off her feet and essentially took her. And this really hurt Mo, so he stole the wedding ring and then he passed away. And now what we're doing is getting the ring back, getting Captain Gordon back because he was kidnapped by the Red Claw gang, and reuniting the two. We end up finding the Red Claw gang, and they make a deal with us saying that they'll give us Captain Gordon if we bring back a treasure from the Floating Dutchman. Now the Floating Dutchman is off in some other cave on Skull Island in the Skyway. We raid the Mary Celestia. It's this ghost ship. We fight the Floating Dutchman. We take the loot, and we return to the Red Claw gang. They give us Captain Gordon, and then we return Captain Gordon to Mo's fiance. Our final rat is, interestingly, the only free-to-play rat, and that's Mo, who, behind this little door right there, he locked and trapped his old captain Zadok, because Zadok believed that there was a city of gold above them in this cave, and Mo wasn't having any of that. We enter the cave, we find Zadok still alive, still trapped. Oh. Alright, that was weird. Let's go into the cave. So we enter the cave, we find Zadok still alive and trapped, and he tells us that this elevator basket will get us to the City of Gold. Now, when we go up there, we're pretty surprised to see there's a Aztecan civilization here who fled from the mainland Azteca we see in Wizard 101 because of Morganth. Now in Wizard 101, Morganth races a comet down on Azteca and is sort of the Ragnarok event of the Aztecan people. So whether or not they fled here before in anticipation or after in reaction to Morganth and Wizard 101, we actually don't know. It's a little interesting. But anyways, we come here, we talk to the Aztecans, and they say that there's some ancient evil lurking here that's stopping them from living freely. So we fight this evil named Cho'okakab. We free them from this curse, return to Zadok, and let them know that there is a city of gold up there, and return to Mo. With all three rats laid to rest, we are left with Lasco, who tells us that the Frog Father in Jonahtown may have the whereabouts of Ratbeard. So we land in Jonahtown and we speak to Captain Ahab, who tells us that he's got a few little tasks for us to do before we get to talk to the Frog Father. First up, one of his fishermen was missing in a nearby vortex that he wants us to go save him from. We save him, bring him back, it's all easy and done. And then he tells us his son is missing. Now his son went to go sell fish to nearby water moles on their own little island, and once we arrive there, we're told that Ahab's son was kidnapped by Ratbeard and the enemy of the water moles, the Waponis. We defeat some Waponi ships and return to the water moles, and we get a little hint as to where he might be. He's back on Skull Island. He was stolen by this mishmash group of people on Ratbeard's crew. We go there, we fight them, we take him back, and then we bring him back to Captain Ahab. Now, during this whole thing, we actually don't see Ratbeard. He's kind of a man behind the curtain at this point. He's just directing these other people. Why he wanted to kidnap Captain Ahab's son, it's not really clear. We're not really told, but he was behind it. And so, in doing so, as a favor, Captain Ahab tells us that the Frog Father is actually in Jonahtown. Once we eventually gain audience with the Frog Father, he tells us that in the Book of Favors, I'm going to quote my script here. I'm not really reading off the script, I'm kind of just using it as a reference, clearly. So, the Frog Father describes from the Book of Favors that in order for him to give us the location of Ratbeard, we must fulfill a favor first for the Frog Father, by attacking the Presidio and stealing exotic spice the Monkeistans have control over. So, in order for him to give us the information, we have to do something for him, and that is steal exotic spices that the Monkeistans have a monopoly on. So we go to the Presidio, we attack it, we steal the spices, but then we meet a prisoner. Now this prisoner changes depending on who you pick in Pirate 101, and for the privateer, let's take a little look. This is going to be spoilers for where the privateer's at on the day of recording, but that doesn't really matter. So on the privateer, the Presidio companion that we got is Lucky Jack Russell. And so they're a prisoner. They tell us that they actually know who we are and knew our parents. So we break him out. We return to the Frog Father with the spices. The Frog Father says, and I quote, "The Frog Father again refers to the Book of Favors, stating that because he has an outstanding favor with Ratbeard, he cannot give us his location, but can instead transfer the favor he owes to another person who owes him a favor. This is One-Eyed Jack." The Frog Father sends us off to One-Eyed Jack and Flotsam to fulfill this favor. So we arrive on Flotsam and kind of have to take part in a little goose chase. We speak to this barkeep who tells us that Mustang Sally knows the location of One-Eyed Jack. We go to Mustang Sally and she tells us that Ned knows the location of One-Eyed Jack and is actually the first guy we spoke to. So they did a little tricksy-wooksy on us. So we return to One-Eyed Jack and he tells us that he left Ratbeard in a house that was nearby. So we go to that house and we find Ratbeard as he's burning the last pages of the will as he's escaping. So naturally, we pick up the pieces left of the will, and it's a little riddle for us. So the way that Captain Gunn is pointing us to his treasure is by taking these steps that go through his life and all these important events. So starting at Captain Gunn's house, we find the next piece of paper that points us to the floating lighthouse where we have to find the gravestone of his first mate, Ned. And as we're looking, we come across this evil skeleton guy named Old Scratch who tells us that because we've trampled on his property, his lands, he's gonna kill us for it. Well, we beat him in combat and he decides to join our team. And this is the Old Scratch that we know and love. This guy. Old Scratch points us to Ned's grave, where we learn that the next piece of the puzzle is on Bounty Island, which we can actually see over there. That is Bounty Island right there. It's a big X marks the spot thanks to Squinty, this crab guy. So on Bounty Island, we hear there's Squinty, and we go through this sort of Pirate 101. Wait, that's the name of the game. I didn't even realize that. We go through this. So what we actually go through is a trial course of what pirates do, like rigging sails, loading a cannon, using a spyglass, and it takes us into the X marks the spot where we find the body of Captain Gunn. And Squinty here gets all mad that we found it before him, and so we do a little brawl. He runs away, and we're left with Captain Gunn. There's no gold, but our new companion, Old Scratch, tells us he can have Captain Gunn speak to us through his body there. So he sort of reanimates Captain Gunn, who tells us that Ratbeard cheated using Waponies to swim through the flooded tunnels to steal the gold. And he tells us some alarming news. He tells us that the Waponies are actually going to sacrifice the gold to their fire god on the Waponi Wu volcano that we can kind of see over somewhere. Oh, I think it was right there. On that big volcano there. They're going to be throwing the gold into the lava. So with Captain Gunn's blessing, we escape to the volcano. So we land at the base of the volcano, we fight through these Waponies, and then we ascend the volcano. And once we reach the peak, we find the leader, who is named Chumbawamba, and all the Waponies throwing their gold into the lava, with Ratbeard sort of hung by his foot ahead, swinging over the lava. So we defeat the leader, we stop the Waponies, and Chumbawamba actually jumps into the lava as a sort of sacrifice play. And then Ratbeard frees himself. He reluctantly joins our crew, apparent that he is no good captain and thinks he can do better under us. We take the rest of the gold and we return to Captain Avery. And Ratbeard tells us that the Waponies betrayed him and just kind of used him. So he feels a little bad and thinks that, you know, maybe he could rectify his actions and become a good man. With knowledge and gold in hand, we return to Captain Avery, who thanks us for our work and tells us that we're off scot-free. And that's the end of Book 1. So we start Book 2 right as where we ended Book 1, and that is giving the remaining Captain Gunn's loot to Captain Avery. And he picks out a single chalice and tells us that for the longest time, he's been trying to open treaty with any sort of imperial power, and he's been rejected numerous times, but this is his best chance to do so with Monquista. So he directs us over to Puerto Rico to talk to the governor that is representing the Monquistan government to see if we can open a treaty with them. So we arrive in Puerto Rico and are told to meet with the Majordomo. And he tells us that our paperwork checks out, but our attire does not. So he tells us that we got to get a better outfit, and then we can speak to the governor. And so we speak to this tailor who tells us to destroy some ships to get some cloth, some silk. He makes us an outfit. He makes us look like a fool, but it does gain us audience with the governor. So as we're walking up the steps, we're expected to meet Governor Ortega, but Ortega was replaced with Governor Medina, as Ortega was declared a traitor to the Monquistan crown and thrown into the coal mines. So Medina has no awareness of this treaty or these talks and says, hey, you're shit out of luck. Instead, though, she tells us about the story of Gortez. So here is the story of Gortez and the Isle of Doom.
The islands of this cluster are covered in ancient ruins whose mysterious builders vanished long ago. Nobody knows who they were or what they were doing, but they left a legacy inlaid in the living rock of their temples. Gold. The Monquista came to Skull Island before any of the other nations of the Spiral. The gold we pry from these ruins makes us wealthy and powerful. Bold Monquistadors led the conquest of Skull Island, but one name outshines all the rest. Gortez. We owe him our wealth, our influence, our very empire. Almost a year ago, Gortez embarked on his latest adventure. I am asking you to follow him into the very heart of the Isle of Doom. Do not be afraid. The island is named after its discoverer, Baron Ferdinand von Doom, who was unfortunately devoured by a giant snake. I hear the island is a very pleasant place, as long as you avoid the swarms of carnivorous bees, flesh-eating plants, and the savage frog tribes with poisonous skin. I have no doubt you'll do very well there. Gortez was drawn to the Isle of Doom by rumors of vast treasures on that shadowed island. At first, Gortez was triumphant, as always. He and his troops cut a swath into the jungle, crushing all who opposed them. Gold poured out of the jungle, more gold than ever before. But in the months that followed, disquieting rumors reached us here. Gortez, they say, had lost his way and was doing questionable things. 4 months ago, all contact was lost with Gortez and his army. Their fate was not known until a Monquistador came staggering out of the deep jungle, raving with fever. He said Gortez had built a kingdom for himself in the jungle and ruled it like a tyrant. He had also found something wondrous, the gold monkey, a treasure beyond reckoning.
So essentially what Governor Medina wants is for us to not only save and bring back Gortez, their prized possession fighter, but also bring back the golden monkey, this super powerful, super rich relic for the Monquistan government. So Governor Medina directs us to the Isle of Doom, which lays deep in the gold mine of Tradewind Skyway. Also, I think I've been calling it Puerto Rico and not Puerto Mico. Yeah, I'm just dumb. So as we reach the dock of the gold mine, we head deep into this cave to find their home base camp. And we speak to the foreman Salazar, who kind of gives us the rundown on what's going on and the condition of the Monquistans that are stationed here. What the foreman Salazar tells us is that once they reached inside this flooded tunnel here, all of their laborers effectively unionized and went on strike. And he wants us to defeat them in order to get information on Gortez. And in case you're curious, the laborers that they hired were the water moles. So not only did Ratbeard hire the water moles as laborers, but the Monquistans are also using the water moles as laborers for their own gain. So we reach deep into the flooded tunnel to find the chamber of Haku, who is the leader of these water moles, and we have to defeat him in order to get our information. So we defeat him, we stop the work stoppage, we stop the labor strike, and we return to the foreman Salazar. Salazar tells us that the gold monkey is a statue, which is unlike anything we've ever heard before. And he tells us the path that Gortez and his army took to head deep into the jungle. And the foreman gives us a name, Criado. This is a side tangent, but I just noticed that this NPC's tag is loyal laborer. That's that's crazy. Okay, we're gonna ignore that. Maybe I'll do some side quest stuff and see what's going on. Because I mean, just like the main quest, I've also never really experienced the side quests in this game. So maybe I'll do that as well. So in our search to find Criado, we end up in this is Survivor's Cave, and we speak to Ramos, who is delighted to see us, thinking that the Monquistan government sent us to save him and his troops. And we have the misfortune of telling him that we are actually not here for him, but for Criado, who tells us that the poisonous trogs that we saw in the puppet show actually kidnapped him and are planning to feast on him, and we have to go save him. And just through this cave here, namely Sacrifice Cave, is where we break out Criado and save him, and he tells us how we can get past, and he tells us how to get past these poisonous bees in order to head deeper into the gold mine to reach Cortez and his army. And after collecting some flowers, collecting some poison from the Truggies, we are able to head deep into the ancient ruins. This is where we meet Hopper, one of Cortez's lieutenants, and this dude is out of his mind. He's crazy, he's a little high, he's a little loopy, which is something I wasn't expecting in a Kingsisle game. But he tells us that after they arrived, the Armada arrived and started excavating to search, presumably for the Golden Monkey. And Hopper directs us to some of Cortez's other troops, who then tell us what they need to give us an audience with Cortez. And obviously, with the Armada breathing down their necks, what they want us to do is defeat the lieutenants and the captains that have been stationed here so that we can drive out the Armada forces, and then they'll give us an audience with Cortez himself. So, as we enter the Valley of the Golden Monkey, we're told that we have to go through a few trials first in order to meet Cortez. Our first trial is a trial by combat to fight the big sumo water mole. Our next trial is to collect the spider eggs from around this area and avoid all the spiders. Our final trial is in this cave of crystals where we're told to listen for voices and hear what they say. And what we hear is the voice of our parents telling us to find them, find their grave, and find the key to El Dorado. But before they can tell us anymore, they're cut off by some mysterious power, and we're left to talk back to the monkeys. Just through these gates, we gain audience with Cortez, who has a little monologue of his own.
You're here. Are you an assassin? No. I'll tell you what you are. You're an organ grinder sent by circus clowns to make me do a dance. I refuse. The simpering fools at home, those tamed lapdogs, they have no right to judge me. They have no idea what I have found here. They'd refuse to see it. Look around you. The creatures that built these temples shattered mountains to raise their perfect pyramids. They drew gold down from the stars. They lived like titans, and now they're gone. But the trees remain. The jungle beat them. It will destroy us all unless we become one with it. The trees spoke to me and showed me the way. When I saw this place, shining gold, burning like fire, I knew who I was. I found the gold monkey. The fools in Puerto Rico think the gold monkey is another priceless toy for them to steal. They are wrong. The gold monkey is me. They want to stop me, but they are too good to make the trip themselves. Cowards. I will send them an answer. Your broken bones. Children!
So Cortez tells us that he is in fact the golden monkey, and not some ancient relic that the Monquistan government can sell and use for trade. And this sort of enacts his ideology of being anti-imperial and anti-government, and saying that the Monquistan government has rules and laws just for their own sake, and not for the actual goodwill of the people. But, of course, we have orders from Captain Avery to get the treaty, so we have to take him prisoner and return him to the Monquistan government in Tradewind Skyway. And if you noticed earlier when we were in this building, the two governors I was talking about were not the one that was in this room. There was a third one, which is who we meet when we return Cortez. Governor Varga tells us that Governor Medina was also deemed a traitor and was thrown into the coal mines for the Monquistans. And he tells us that in order to properly process Cortez, we have to head to the royal court in the heart of Monquista itself, Monquista City. And that's where Book 2 ends. It's sort of a cliffhanger that leads us into the next world of Monquista, so we get to continue this sort of story. So where we ended Book 2 was in Puerto Rico and Tradewind Skyway, being told that we have to bring Cortez all the way to Monquista City and Tierra Prometa Skyway and gain an audience with the king and the queen. And we arrive and we experience a little bit of racism as a different species than the Monquistans, and they eventually let us in. We get audience with the king and queen, and they tell us to bring Cortez to Zenda, the prison, and they hand us a little letter, and then we're off to Zenda. Once we're here in the prison, we hand the letter off to the warden, who reads it aloud and says that we and Cortez are to be declared enemies of the state and are to be assassinated, essentially. And so we're like, okay, we're not doing that shit. Cortez is like, bro, if you break me out, I'll help you. So we break him out, we fight the prison guards, and we essentially take over this prison. And we speak to Queen Eleanor here, and we begin to conspire a civil war against the Monquistan government. And as we experience in book 2, there's a lot of corruption with the government of Puerto Rico. It got replaced 2 times in the span of time that we initially went to Tradewind Skyway and finished Tradewind Skyway. So there's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of not so good elements of the Monquistan government that Cortez notices, that Queen Eleanor has noticed, all the other queens have noticed, and some of the civilians as well. Some of these prisoners like Lorenzo, Flores, and this is where the civil war aspect of Monquista starts to brew. And in return, Queen Eleanor says that if they win power, then they'll give us the treaty that Captain Avery was wanting. Because at the end of Tradewind Skyway, we still did not have the treaty for trade. So this is essentially our new out for Captain Avery to get a trade treaty with Monquista and Skull Island. So Queen Eleanor directs us to Queen Anna, who has already the plans that are put in place for the Civil War. They've been planning it for a long time, but they just quite didn't have enough firepower or manpower in order to enact these plans. So we have to go to speak to Queen Anna in the Summer Palace to sort of get caught up to speed on what the plans are. But once we reach Queen Anna, she tells us that the plans that have been put in place have been foiled, and so we have to come up with completely new plans to overtake the Monquistan government. So with that in mind, we return to Queen Eleanor, who tells us the story of the monkey's paw and how there was a big war over it and it was lost in the scuffle, so no one actually knows where it is. But if we can get it, then we could use it in our power to win the war. The Queen Eleanor directs us over to Don Quixote of La Mancha, who was the last person to have had the monkey's paw. We arrive in La Mancha to the donkey and his sort of apprentice, his friend, and they tell us the story of the monkey's paw.
The monkey's paw is a sacred relic, the preserved hand of Saint Bonzo the Unfortunate, martyred no less 3 times during the Great Reconciliation of the Holy Church. Blessed by the first banana tree, Bonzo worked many miracles before his 3rd and final death. After his death, Bonzo's hand was fixed to the end of a golden scepter and retains miraculous powers to this day. Any Monquistan who holds it may make 3 wishes, which are granted by divine grace. But if their soul is not pure, their wishes will bring them despair instead of happiness. So it was with my master. Mon Quixote, a retainer of the Lord of La Mancha, undertook a great quest to find the paw. After many trials, he found the relic and brought it back to La Mancha. He was tasked to bring the paw to his lord, but could not resist temptation. He made 2 wishes, and despair followed. For his first wish, my master asked for 1 million bananas. He was hungry, you see. For his second wish, my lord sought power. He wished to become a Don, a lord. He wished to become Don Quixote. But this did not happen. Instead of Don Quixote, he became Don Quixote, transformed from a Monquistan into a donkey. The transformation drove him mad. But that was just the beginning of the troubles. 1 million bananas, This is an unimaginably rich hoard. Word spread quickly that La Mancha had a priceless heap of bananas, and every lord in Moquista came to claim a share of the treasure. The war that followed devastated La Mancha, leaving it empty and without a lord. Thus, you find it and my master.
So essentially, this is the monkey's paw of the story. You know, the monkey paw curls once you make a wish, and if your soul isn't pure, the wish doesn't actually happen. It's a trick. So in lieu of that, Pancho Stanza, the monkeyson who was speaking, directs us over to a hermit in St. Bonabo's Abbey, and this is Antonio de Miranda. So Antonio tells us that there's actually a book that covered this Battle of La Mancha that is now being held in Monquistan City. So our next goal is to grab this book and learn about where exactly the paw landed after this battle. But we are an enemy of the state as it stands, so we have to break in through the sewers to get into Monquistan City. So what we do is we go through the sewers, we sneak into the back through the library, and we meet this nice librarian who helps us out and gives us a mask, which I believe you can actually equip. Yeah, so this is the mask that you wear in Monquista City to sort of hide yourself as the enemy of the state that they're all trying to kill. What we learned from the book is that Martin Valvida and his two brothers actually took the monkey's paw from the Battle of La Mancha and sailed over to Diablo Cut as an escape plan. And it's worth mentioning that Pancho is only really helping us because he knows that Don Quixote has one wish left. And so if we get the monkey's paw back for him, he can transform his master back into a regular Monquistan and then give it to us for our civil war. So once in Diablo Cut, we come across this shield marker that warns us to step away and run back without looking. And, you know, as the pirate, as the main character, we're going to venture deep further into Diablo Cut, where we come across their marooned ship and this gentleman right here. We go into the ship to find the chest of the monkey's paw, but it's empty. So we have Old Scratch use some of his magic on this guy here, just like he did with Captain Gunn, who tells us that the Valvida brothers and the monkey's paw ran into this cave. And it's inside this cave and through this speaker we learn what happened to the Valvida brothers. And we can actually see them in the crown shop, because I'm not going to go through that dungeon again. But Moresco Valvida wished for his troops and him to be able to fly home and return home, which made them into little demon guys with wings, while Martin Valvida wished for his fallen troops to rise and come alive again, but this was in the form of a zombified skeleton. A third wish was made for the troops to get water, but instead of giving them water to drink and quench their thirst, it raised terrors from the deep. And so seeing this, the third Valvida brother hid the monkey's paw in a chamber and locked it behind himself and hid it behind 3 tokens that you have to get in the dungeon in order to gain access to the monkey's paw. So throughout the dungeon we have to obtain the 3 keys, and once we have the 3 keys, one of which was held by the flying Valvida brother, the other was held by the undead Valvida brother, and the third was held by the terror of the deep. And so once we get those, we can put them in the door that the third Valvida brother locked himself behind, and we come across him and a whole array of monkey's paws. And he tells us that the final trial is to pick out the correct one, and if we pick the wrong one, then we die. But obviously, the real monkey's paw is the only one that has a monkey's paw on it. The others had a bunch of other random animals, so we picked the right one, and we're on our merry way. With Pancho Stanza's promise in mind, we first return the monkey's paw back to La Mancha and back to the Don Quixote so that he can make his third wish and return to normal. Except, as you can see right here, Don Quixote wishes again for 1,000,000 bananas and sort of breaks the economy of Monquista. And so Pancho just gives us the paw and says, here, use it for what you need, but know that you, as a non-Monquistan, cannot use the paw, which is fine. We only need it for Cortez and the Queen Eleanor for the Civil War. With the monkey paw in hand, we return to Zenda and return to Cortez and Eleanor give them the paw, and wish them luck with their civil war. And in return, the Queen Eleanor gives us a treaty to hand to the Major Domo and the governor of Tradewind Skyway of Puerto Rico in order to start that trade process with Skull Island. And that's essentially where book 3 ends. It kind of has a conclusion that's cohesive and doesn't exactly lead us to anywhere until book 4 starts, when the Major Domo gives us a letter from One-Eyed Jack talking about this map that we supposedly have, and everyone's trying to kill us for it. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed book 3. That's the entirety of Monquista. It's a pretty short world. I hope we can eventually come back here. I think the politics and the climate of Monquista is really interesting and really cool. There's a lot more to explore in Monquista, and they even have two skyways that are unexplored. So hopefully we can get some more of that in Monquista. So book 4 starts like any other good book does, and that is with a letter. And this letter comes from the Major Domo back in Tradewind Skyway. So if you can recall, we ended book 3 in Monquista, the homeland of the Tradewind Skyway. And the Major Domo gives us this letter that came from One-Eyed Jack, the jackrabbit that we saw back in Flotsam in book 2 or book 1. And basically this letter tells us that every pirate in Skull Island wants to kill us and take this map from us. And he tells us to meet him in Scrimshaw so we can talk it over and see what's going on. So we land at the Scrimshaw docks and we try to find Jack, and he's nowhere to be found. So we talk to a barkeep who tells us that the Wharf Rat gang actually kidnapped him, so they took him. And it's actually none other than Blind Mew who tells us where exactly he went. This is a similar scenario as to what happened in book 1 with Ratbeard, where Blind Mew actually told us the direction of where the crew went. So we end up saving Jack, and he tells us that Captain Avery has been telling every other pirate that we have the motherlode of all maps. We have this holy relic of maps, but we don't have a map. We never took anything from Captain Gun's loot. We never picked up another map. So it's a little confusing, so we gotta go and head back to Captain Avery. So in a surprise to no one, Captain Avery once again lied and told the pirates that we had the map that he had. And in fact, it's only one of 7 pieces of a map that came from El Dorado and Marco Pollo. And then he tells us the story of Marco Pollo.
Have you heard of El Dorado? It's a legend of the Skyways, a lost island of solid gold. But you can't just sail there. The storm gate to El Dorado never appears in the same place twice and doesn't stay open long. Marco Pollo, greatest explorer the Spiral has ever known, made a map that can guide a ship to El Dorado. That map is the key to unimaginable wealth. The problem is, that much wealth is dangerous. Pirates will kill for it. So, to protect the secret, Marco Pollo tore his map into 7 pieces and hid them throughout the Spiral. I don't know how, but Captain Gun got one of the pieces. You've seen it, you know. You don't remember? You found it in Gun's treasure. It was the piece of sailcloth the monkey chalice was wrapped in. Truth be told, that sailcloth was the reason I sent you after Gun's treasure in the first place.
Yep, so like every good pirate, Captain Avery deceived, lied to get an advantage. But he's going to cut us in on the loot, on Marco Pollo's loot, on El Dorado's loot, and he goes to find the first map piece that he had in his little desk, and it's gone. And it only could have come down to one person, and that is Finn, the shark, the cutthroat from the first book that deceived Captain Avery. So Captain Avery trusted Finn, Finn betrayed him again, and now he has the map piece, so we gotta go find it. So we land at Cutthroat Bay here on the map, and we go into the hideout, and we fight off, what's his name, Bert? We fight, looking at my notes here, Bert Finney. So we fight Bert Finney, who is a lieutenant to Finn. We fight them, and he tells us that Finn is on a ship with a buyer of the map piece. So we catch up to Finn and the buyer, who are in this shipbreaker Tempest here, and the buyer is none other than the Armada. It's the Armada, some Armada lieutenants and Finn are doing a trade when we step in and stop them, and then this big fight goes down. We capture Finn again, and then the Armada speaks to us and tells us that they don't tire, they don't rest, and they will get the rest of the map. But it is on this ship where we get our first map piece to El Dorado. And you can kind of see, this is a little spoiler for where we are at max level, but on the first map piece, I believe it's this big one right here, Old Scratch notices this ancient mojo on it. It's something he can't read, but he knows that it's very old and ancient. So with map piece in hand, we head back to Captain Avery, who then tells us the story of the Armada.
The whole mess started years ago, back during the Polarian War. Marleybone, Valencia, Monquista, all the great powers were drawn into a terrible war with Polaris, which threatened to tear the spiral apart. The first clockwork soldiers were invented by some genius in Valencia. The Valencians built a horde of them and gave them control of their navy. The new Armada helped end the war. But the Valencians kept building more clockworks. Now they've lost control of their puppets. And they are puppets. The clockworks aren't alive like you and me. Hollow men, run on gears and wires. Heartless, soulless, and ruthless. Kane, first of the clockworks, commands the Armada. They say Kane is stronger, smarter, and faster than any living being. Kane has a court of elite clockworks to do his will. You know one of them. Deacon, Kane's spy master. He's the one who imprisoned you. The Armada's been worming its way into Skull Island. You've seen their excavations in the jungles. Now we know what they're after. El Dorado. They mean to conquer the spiral and rebuild it, with no place for pirates. If Kane reaches El Dorado, there'll be no stopping them.
We learn that the Armada actually came from a inventor in Valencia who just built them as a response to the Polarian War, which is basically like World War I or World War II in our history. And they basically took over Valencia. As we learn later, once we get to Valencia and Valencia Part 2, they are the dominating class, while like the guinea pigs and the crabs are the more lower class in the Valencian hierarchy. And so that's where we are right now. And on the topic of Valencia, Captain Avery tells us that Marco Pollo actually died in Valencia. Even though he was originally from Cool Ranch, he actually stayed, resided, and then ended up dying in Valencia. And that's our next stop. So this next part, before we actually get to Valencia, involves these three Monquistans, and they actually fought the Armada. It's not actually, it's not clarified whether they fought them during the Polarian War or during some other altercation. But Hooktail, Django, and Roberto here, they tell us that we need an Indigo Windstone, which the Marlebonians have. So we go over to that, fight some of them. We realize that none of them have it. Yeah, El Tiburon. We fight this shark in the ship, and it's protecting this chest. And once we beat it, we make our way through the skyways and get to Valencia. However, first, before we can actually head to Valencia, we need travel papers. And the only way we can get that is through Cortez and the Queen Eleanor in Monquista, because the skyway that we're going to be using is actually in Monquista. And since the Monquistan Empire hates us, we go through Cortez. At this current point in time, the Monquistan Civil War is currently ongoing. So Cortez, Queen Eleanor, and their troops are currently combating the Monquistan Empire. And like every quest in Pirate 101 and Wizard 101, it is a trade, it's a favor. So in order to get our travel papers, we must help the resistance efforts. And that is through just beating up some ships. We sink these ships, we come back, Queen Eleanor gives us the papers, and then we're off through Avernus, which is a skyway that connects to Valencia, but it's also very dangerous and kind of interesting. So we braved the first half of the Skyway, and then now we're in the other dangerous part. And this is, interestingly, this is Dragonspire, and we see the Dragon Titan back there. That's the Dragonspire that shows up in Wizard 101, which is very interesting. There's not a whole lot to this. There's the Monquista, there's the Valencia, which we're about to go through. Did I miss it? Oh, no, it's right here to the left. And then there's another unused storm gate. But this is an interesting area. And then now we have the other half of the Skyway. So once we land in Valencia, when we were helping Hooktail and them, they told us to meet with Captain Steed in Valencia, who was handling some of the resistance efforts in Valencia. So we head over to him, who's in this little mansion, and we talk to him. And also, while we were helping Hooktail, he gave us a amulet that he told us to show to Captain Steed, so that Steed knows that we're part of the resistance efforts and not, you know, some spy or a cop that's trying to arrest him or kill or assassinate him. And once we show up to Steed, we show him the amulet, he knows we're good. He gives us a lead with Thaddeus in Sevilla, which is a major city in the Skyway. But if we're gonna get in there, we're gonna need to get a disguise, and the only real disguise we can get is an Armada uniform. So we have to go sink some Armada ships in the Skyway, take some of their gear, return to Steed, fashion an outfit that we can wear, and then head into the heart of this Skyway, Sevilla. So we land in Sevilla with our uniform on, and we're noticeably shorter than the rest of the Armada troops, but this allows us to sneak past these guards undetected, and then we could speak to Thaddeus, our lead, on what the Armada's doing, what their resistance is doing, and see if we can get to Marco Polo's tomb. So Thaddeus tells us that ever since the Armada started occupying this area, that everything's just been thrown up, it's in turmoil, they're destroying stuff, they're burning books, they're getting rid of things, and he points us to the historian Gonzago, who then points us to Giafra, the custodian, who then gives us a key to sneak into the library and see if we can pick up anything we know about Marco Polo. So we sneak into the library and we speak to librarian Adelmo, who tells us that any novel pointing to Marco Polo, books about Marco Polo, books written about people written about Marco Polo, anything having to do with Marco Polo in any sort of capacity was stolen and taken by the Armada. And so we return to Gonzago, who tells us that maybe they were put into the Armada fortress nearby, because that's where they've been taking a bunch of the stuff. And so we ransack that fortress. We see there's no books there, but there is a log. And that log tells us that the books were actually delivered to Cadiz, which to the Valencians means it's over, it's done with. And that is actually Kane's center of power. And interestingly, I don't think we ever actually get to Cadiz or see Cadiz, but it's just, to them it's lost and our mission's over. But we have one hope left, and that is in Grancia, which is where Marco Polo taught and died. His tomb is there. Would just like to make a note. I said Marco Polo taught in Grancia. He actually retired in Grancia, so he retired and died there. And this was all told to us by a nearby scholar named Aldemar. So he tells us and directs us to Grancia, where we then meet with Lorenzo, who tells us about the tomb and the chapel and how to get there. But when we go there to the chapel, we see that it's blocked off by all this rubble. As we can see, there's some rubble here, and it's on the other side there. We can't actually get it through that direction, so we need to find another way. And see, here's the chapel. The way to get through is through the catacombs, which we can see over here. And the big plight of Grancia, as we can see right here, is the Armada actually designed these devices that are just eating and destroying the islands. And that's part of the Armada's whole plan is to just use these to destroy all the land masses in Upper Skyway so that they can take over and build their own. Because as we see with that thing, the Armada can build their own sort of masses and land masses where they live. So that's what Kane's plan is. But going back to Marco Polo, we enter through the catacombs to get to his tomb to find the map piece. So we enter the tomb and we check the chest. There's no map piece, but there is a blue windstone. But it's at this point that we were ambushed by the Armada and one of the members of Kane's court. And this turns out to be Fool, Phule. He's the jester of the court. And he sicks the Armada lieutenants on us, and we have to do this big battle to get out. We get free, Fool is nowhere to be found, and all we're left with is a blue windstone, and we return to Captain Steed. Now that we're in the Skyway, there's a better look at that big mass I was talking about. And you can actually see right there on the sides are a similar mechanism we saw in Grantia that are world-eating. So maybe it's a big ship that Kane's using to maybe get rid of bigger land masses, which sort of, that's terrifying. We return to Steed and tell him about all of our troubles and plights in Valencia, what happened with the books, the ledger about what happened to the books, the encounter with Fool and the Armada lieutenants, and he tells us that there is potentially one last hope, and that is a student of Marco Polo who heard the last words of Marco Polo, and that is Varro, and he is now a monk in Monquista. And if we go back to Monquista, we can actually see this student of Marco Polo, this horse, in the tower in St. Bonado's Abbey, where we spoke to a couple people in Monquista. So we have to go back there and talk to him and see if there's anything we can learn from him about Marco Polo's map or his resting place where we can get some sort of information. It is in this tower we speak to Brother Varro, and he tells us that Marco Polo did speak of El Dorado, but very limited. He said that it harbored great powers, evil powers, and that no one should ever go there. However, Marco Polo did keep one map piece in Cool Ranch, his home place, his birthplace, and that is probably our next best start. I just wanted to throw out this little addendum because actually I made a mistake in that very last part. The map piece in Cool Ranch was not actually held by Marco Polo, it was held by Christopher Clark, who was one of the people on the expedition to El Dorado. And so that is why we head to Cool Ranch. So Marco Polo's map piece went with Marco Polo in the tomb that is missing, and Christopher Clark's map piece is the one that is in Cool Ranch. But yeah, thank you. And heading to Cool Ranch is where Book 5 picks up, and there's a whole lot of books there. Cool Ranch is a long world that's split into two parts, with Port Regal in the middle. So we're going to get to that. We'll get to Cool Ranch, which is personally my favorite part of Pirate 101. I love Cool Ranch Part 1 and Part 2. I think Part 1 more so, but Part 2 was great as well. Book 5 of Pirate 101. It starts like any other good book, and that is with an adventure. We brave the Skyway in Flotsam to get to Cool Ranch, and then we speak to this old deputy guy here, Deputy Fowler, who tells us that he doesn't know nothing about Clark, but he directs us to someone who can, and that is Jane Canary in the Silver Spur Saloon. Now, they're not here now because of what happens in Tumbleweed Skyway later in Cool Ranch Part 2, but they do stand here and they tell us that, well, the Clark that we're looking for, Christopher Clark, he's dead. He's been dead for a while, but he does have a son named Merryweather who lives in a nearby house down the street. So they direct us to him, and we can see what's going on. We come across this house, and I mean, you can see him here now because the quest line's over with, but we come across this note that tells us that we should direct any sort of inquiries we have to the local doctor, who is around over here, Dr. Coop right there, and he tells us that Merryweather has been off doing these sort of studies and taking archaeological notes nearby in like Junction and other places. So he tells us to go find him at Junction. Upon reaching Junction, we speak to Professor Murgatroyd. I believe that's his name. Yep, Murgatroyd, who tells us that Clark actually left and he is on his way to Big Skyway, but there was a bison burial ground that he's stopping at first. So our best bet's probably to look there. Our search for Clark ends in the bison burial ground, where as we approach this cave, we hear some screams on the inside, and then we go in and we see this nurse being held captive by some of the local bison, and they send their troops after us. They send their ancestors after us, and then they send their ancestors' pets after us, the ghosts of them. And we go through those 3 rounds of fights. We save the person who was held captive, who was Nurse Quinn. So not actually Clark, Meriwether Clark, but she tells us that she was with him, and he was taken captive by the bison. I was on my way to Elder Bluff to do the next part, and I got captured. Oh god. Well, at least we can still my build go in action.
Yes? Will do. On it, Captain.
Okay, a little double super hit. That's crazy, I didn't kill all of them. Chantel will finish him off. There we go. Now we can cut the Elder Bluff now. So we arrive on Elder Bluff and we speak to some of these bison here, who tell us that first, we're trespassers, so they're gonna decide our fate. And so we have this big brawl in this tent, and then so we fight, and then their chieftain decides just to fight us on his own volition and ignores the elders of the village. And after that fight, it gets resolved. Seven Storms here, he kind of calms everyone down and says that Meriwether Clark will have to answer for his crimes of desecrating the graves. But he says that he actually didn't desecrate any graves, so we have to find proof that someone else did it, and that is with the Red Sash Gang. And before we head out to get back their charms and defeat the Red Sash Gang, we get to speak to Clark for a second, who tells us that he will help us with the map if we just get him out of there, which is, you know, music to our ears. So it gives us more incentive to go and do these quests. So we land at the Hidden Valley Ranch, which is the secret hideout of the Red Sash Gang, and we do a little beat 'em up. We take the charms back and we return to Elder Bluff to speak to the elders, and they tell us that we have one more thing to do before they can free Clark, and that is appease the spirits back on the burial ground, because those graves were desecrated by the Red Sash Gang, so we gotta resolve that issue. And that's basically a dungeon with 4 different fights, fighting the spirits and putting back the graves and the structures there. And then we return to Elder Bluff. And you can see there's a little bit of an environment change. I'm on the privateer right now, actually, Chernobyl. And
I'm ready.
once we let Clark go, one of the bison actually come with me, and we recruit them, and that's this person here, the bison shaman. So I just wanted to show that real quick. But we let Clark go. We go to Cooper's Roost, back to his house, and we are ambushed. We're ambushed by none other than the leader of the Red Sash Gang, Johnny Ringo's Red Sash Gang. And we sort of fight them off in Clark's house. They go away, so we get to speak with Clark, who tells us that the piece of the map is hidden in a cave in Scorpion Rock. Scorpion Rock is an island, and then Scorpion Rock Cave is the cave where the map piece is in. As we head to Scorpion Rock Cave, we can actually see there's a little rock formation that makes it look like a scorpion. Kind of cool. I actually did not notice that until just now. I always wondered what that was. But we land on Scorpion Rock, and we enter the cave, which is, unsurprisingly, you can see on the island here, it is riddled with scorpions, and we have to fight through them. We go down this path to fight this queen scorpion, this big purple scorpion, and then we see that it's protecting a chest. We open the chest, but it's empty. All that's left in there is a note from one named Captain Blood, who tells Clark, not Meriwether Clark, but Christopher Clark, the original, the father. He tells him that he stole his map piece, his ship, his gold, and he will never get it back. Now, Captain Blood is interesting because Old Scratch actually recognizes this figure and this name, says he's riddled with bad mojo, So we return to Meriwether Clark to get some sort of idea on what to do. So we speak to Meriwether Clark, who tells us that he doesn't know anything about Captain Blood, but maybe the deputy does in Cooper's Roost. We speak to the deputy here, Rooster Cogburn, who tells us that maybe Wild Bill Peacock knows about Captain Blood, and Wild Bill Peacock is the husband to Jane Canary in the Silver Shirts balloon. We speak to Wild Bill, who should be right here, and he tells us that he may not know, but Argleston may know. And that name is interesting. If you played Wizard 101, the librarian actually is named Argleston, but this is a different Argleston. Maybe it's a brother or something, but there's a little Easter egg where Desmond Argleston here refers to us as a wizard. So I don't know, maybe there's something going on there that's deeper, but he tells us that there's only one man who may know where Captain Blood is, and that is El Toro. El Toro currently resides in Santo Pollo, so he gives us some papers that'll let us in, and he needs some errand done anyways, so it gives us the perfect opportunity to go into Santo Pollo. He gives us the letter, he directs us to Santo Pollo, and we're off on our way. We land in Santo Pollo, deliver the Argleston's letter, and it is now our job to find El Toro. And that's kind of where this book ends. It's honestly pretty uneventful, I would say. Not a lot happens. We do something for the Bison, we do something for Meriwether Clark, and then it kind of just ends because we learn of this big figure, Captain Blood, who will become the sort of central antagonist for the next few books as we get into Cool Ranch Part 2. He doesn't appear in Port Regal because that's a whole separate issue. We start with speaking to this professor guy that Desmond Argleston told us to speak to, and he tells us to speak to the local friar who is up here through these gates, and it's the friar that tells us about El Toro. And actually there is a little puppet show for it, so let's get into it.
From the time of my grandfather, the humble village of Santo Pollo has had a protector. Banditos and corrupt governors, thieves and brigands, even the dread pirate Captain Blood, all have learned to fear the sword of El Toro. Cunning as a fox, silent as the snake, strong as the bull whose name he bears, El Toro has never been beaten and never wavered in his mission. He moves like a shadow at midnight, strikes without warning, fights with the strength of 10 men, and then vanishes like the wind. El Toro's greatest weapon is mystery. He could be anyone. He could be anywhere. No one knows what lies beneath El Toro's mask. How can you fight what you cannot see? Sadly, Santo Pollo still needs El Toro. Santa Rana's endless taxes sap the strength of our people. The banditos run riots in our streets, or the Froggerales do nothing. I fear a storm is coming, and even El Toro will be hard-pressed to endure it.
So yeah, we basically get an introduction to who El Toro is, and so their sort of role in this ongoing conflict in Santo Pollo. And in the larger Cool Ranch, we see that these two factions of the Froggerales and then the Banditos, but they're kind of working in unison against the Santo Pollo people with endless taxes. And, you know, these guys aren't obviously in the wealthiest class except for Don Rodrigo, who lives in this manor here, who is... I mean, he doesn't really care about the taxes because they represent a small portion of his wealth, but the rest of Santo Pollo, those taxes are huge, and they are unjustified taxes because of Santa Rana. And speaking of Don Rodrigo, Friar Cluck here tells us to speak to Don Rodrigo as he is the best contact to meeting with El Toro. And he's not here now because of what we'll get to in later books, but, you know, he stands here and he talks to us and he says that he'll contact El Toro if we can prove ourselves to be loyal to the Santo Pollo people. So our first task is to help this lady right here, Estela Castillo, She wants us to check if the church is safe because the night prior El Toro had a big brawl with some guys in there. So we go inside, we check the church, we know it's safe, even if there's a little damage. And then we speak to the Friar Cluck, who is the friar of this church, and let him know that everything's all good. But our deeds are not done there. Friar Cluck directs us to Hector for a new need. Hector tells us that he was planning a wedding cake for a local couple's wedding, but the Banditoes actually stole his sugar, so we have to go into the Skyway and sink some ships until we can collect the sugar that they stole from him. We return the sugar to Hector, but the conflict doesn't stop there. We actually have to help the bride-to-be's father with a conflict that's happening with the wedding, because as we can see her now, but this Serena lady was actually kidnapped by the Banditoes. Our first lead in this case is to beat up a couple Banditoes that are local in the area to see if they know where they actually took her, and they tell us that Fragovilla is the perpetrator of this heinous crime. And somewhere over here, I think it's this cave maybe, is the Fragovilla dungeon, where we fight a bunch of Banditos, and we end up getting to Fragovilla, and we learn that Fragovilla is not even a frog; they are a salamander. And on Swashbucklers, you get this companion, but on other classes you don't. But they tell us that, you know, they're kind of a coward. They say, okay, you can have her back. So we get her. We essentially rescued her and then bring her back to the father. You thought that would be the end of the conflict, but something else has happened. The Don Oscar here, he tells us that the Banditoes stole the strong box that held all the tax people's money. So all the money that they've collected for taxes was stolen by the Banditoes and is hidden in Banditoad Gulch. So in Banditoad Gulch here, you can see the remnants of these towers because I've already went through the quest. But these towers are up, so we have to sabotage all those first before we can get to that tower in the distance you see there. So we defeat, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, I think there's 5 towers that we have to end up doing. And it's after defeating those towers, sabotaging them, that we can storm the main tower, which is up ahead. And this is actually our first instance where we see El Toro in the flesh, and we actually fight alongside him to defeat the guy that's in there. I was just standing there about to start the next part, and then I got pulled. Let's quickly do this. I should be able to kill. And we can see the build in action. Look at that, that's flawless. Even though these guys are like level 15 or whatever, level 20. Alright, let's just cut to the next part. So the guy we fight in here is aptly named El Guapo, as you can see down here. And when we beat him, he actually escaped. So he runs away, and then we're left to talk to El Toro outside. And, you know, he's not here obviously now, because I'm later in the quest line. But we talked to him about Santa Rana and the whole predicament that Santa Poya was facing with the Banditoads and the Fragarales. And it's here that Toro reveals that Santa Rana is the whole mastermind behind all of this. And he tells us that actually his palace is pretty nearby in the Skyway. So that is going to be our first step to rectifying and remedying what the Santa Poya people are facing. So we invade and sabotage this big house. We go up this tower first. It's an armory, and we sabotage a lot of the equipment there. But we learned that the Armada is actually helping Santa Rana, which is pretty interesting. So Santa Rana has made their way to Cool Ranch and is helping these local gangs and people of power sort of oppress the locals. And then after sabotaging the armory, we go straight through that door back there to face Santa Rana, and we fight him, and it seems like all's good, but he escapes once again. It's after that fight, as we're alone standing there with El Toro, that he gives us a letter to give to Don Rodrigo back in Santa Poyo, you know, because they're friends, and then it's time that we head back to Don Rodrigo. Coming back to Don Rodrigo's estate, it is through that sigil where we have to speak to him, and you may notice that's a little weird. Why do we have to go through a sigil to speak to Don Rodrigo? And that is because of a very important thing to do with Santa Rana. So as we're speaking to Don Rodrigo here, you know, Don Rodrigo gasses up El Toro, but we're actually ambushed by Santa Rana, and it's here that Don Rodrigo has to reveal himself as El Toro. So Don Rodrigo, El Toro are one and the same, which is the reveal of the century. And then we fight Santorana once again. And this is the last time. This is the permanent time. And I'll just quickly go through this because I might as well. I might skip to the end, but let's see. You know, let's see if we get this Santorana's hat. Or his gun. That'd be kind of nice. Okay, nope, I just got absolutely nothing. Yeah, that's kind of that's the game. But it's after we beat that, we talk to Don Rodrigo, who is now revealed as El Toro, and he says that he actually doesn't know anything about Captain Blood because it was his father who was the one that fought Captain Blood. Don also explains that his father is now evidently dead, but his companion, his compadre, is still alive, and that is Tonka the Bison. Oh, I am experiencing a connection. Okay, there we go. We're fine. Don directs us over to Eagle Collar in Bison Village to see where Tonka might be. It is upon setting foot in Bison Village where Book 6 ends and Book 7 begins. This one's actually pretty small scale and short. It's mostly just resolving that whole wedding conflict and then beating up Santorana and the reveal that El Toro is Don Rodrigo. We start Book 7 off by speaking to this guy, as we were told to find him by Don Rodrigo / El Toro, spoilers by the way, in the end of Book 6, who tells us that we can find Tonka, who was the companion of the other El Toro, the older El Toro, Don Rodrigo's father. And Eagle Collar here tells us that Tonka is currently with a masked bird called the Free Ranger on a white ship in Cooper's Roost Skyway, and that is probably our best lead. So as you can see on the map here, that is the white ship there with the Free Ranger, but the problem is when we go over there, we actually will see that there are Darkmoor ships fighting it, and that's the sort of ambush that we come upon once we find that ship. And there's these Darkmoor ships fighting it once we board the White Stallion, once we get over there. So now that we're actually coming up on the white ship, we see these Darkmoor ships, and what's interesting is their banner, their flag there has a little duck on it, and that's the perpetrator we see once we get onto this ship. Upon boarding the White Silver Stallion ship, we come across this guy English Bill, the Duck of Death, and these little pink fires around, and then we see, I don't think you can see it now, but that little green smoky thing is where the Free Ranger is actually at. So English Bill has the speech where he says that he cursed the Free Ranger, and then he escapes and runs away as he ambushes us with those lagoons, and we have to, quench those fires, beat the fight, and then we're left with just the Free Ranger, who is poisoned and cursed. Once we talk to the Free Ranger, he tells us that Tonka was taken hostage by English Bill, and that Free Ranger needs the help of the elders back in the village. And while all this is going on, Old Scratch actually tells us that English Bill had some powerful mojo, and the curse that he cast upon the Free Ranger was some dark, powerful mojo that only the Bison and Eagle Village could rectify. It's back in the village where we speak to Dancing Stars, who gives us kind of like a grocery list of everything we need, and it's not really that important, but I'll just read what we need. There is Mandrake Root, Bloodbat Teeth, and then Sun Pollen, and these are all in different skyways in Cool Ranch, so we have to go get all that stuff, and then we come back. Once we return the grocery list and our groceries back to Dancing Stars, he makes this potion, this concoction, gives it to the Free Ranger, and he basically looks like this now, so there's no more green smoke, but he's not quite at 100%. He still needs to recover, and Dancing Stars recognizes that English Bill, the Duck of Death, is a very powerful entity, and we don't know anything about him, so he suggests that we should go to the top of Elder Bluff and invoke the totems there on the top and see if we can learn anything about this English Bill guy. So it is on top of Elder Bluff here where we invoke the totems and summon Thunderbird, this great big blue bird who tells us that the Bison tribe down there and in the Elder Village actually angered the spirits. And in order to learn what we need to know about English Bill, we need to sort of fix that situation and appease the spirits and make them not angry anymore. And Thunderbird leaves it to Sundancer to tell us what exactly happened to anger these spirits. So we speak to Sundancer, who kind of gives us the rundown of the situation of what happened to make the spirits all angry. And he tells us that they had a member named Three Scars who found the totems of the three spirits, which is Sister Snake, Brother Owl, and Brother Wolf. And he used their blessings, each of them, to essentially do evil. He betrayed their blessings, and in order to change the situation, fix it all, I need to find the three totems and appease all three spirits. And the first one is with the Red Sash Gang. It was stolen from the tribespeople here, and so that is our first lead. And also for this one, we need scorpion rattles from their tails in order to summon this first spirit. So it is on top of this hill in Gold Creek, where usually he's right here, but since I'm done with the questline, of course he's gone. We summon Brother Owl, the first spirit, who tells us that Three Scars used his blessing to get a headdress, and he used this for evil. The headdress was destroyed, and we need to make a new one out of beads from the Blackstorm Raiders, which is the tribe of Three Scars after he was exiled or defected from the original tribe, and then also owl feathers from the Queen Hornet that resides down in the lake, or down in the creek, I should say, below there. And after returning with the grocery list of items, Brother Owl makes a new headdress, and we are able to return to Elder Village, and we are done with the first spirit. Pretty easy. I'll talk about the next one since we're next to the Sky Snakes right here. The next spirit we have to appease is Sister Snake, who is angry at Three Scars because Three Scars turned her son into a snake. And the first thing we have to do, so like the Rattler for Brother Owl, we need to get a perfect Sky Snake egg for Sister Snake to summon her. And all we need to do to appease Sister Snake is to get the fangs of her son. We get those fangs, we return to her back on Isla de la Muerte in Santo Pollo, and then we can return to the Elder Village and get the third and final spirit to appease. The final spirit is Brother Wolf, who is a mighty hunter, and in order to prove ourselves, so like the Rattler for Owl and the egg for Snake, we need to face and get the meat of the 4 striped buffaloons here in the Skyway. And this is the coveted striped buffaloon quest because you only get 1 per battle, and it's a pretty hard quest. It's not the worst, but it definitely is fairly difficult. And then once we get the 4... Oh, these are bumbaloons. Sorry, not buffaloons. Once we get the meat for the 4 bumbaloons, we go to Scorpion Rock, that island all the way over there, and we can summon the final spirit. It is here on Scorpion Rock where we summon the final spirit, Brother Wolf, who I can actually see. Surprisingly, that's awesome. But Brother Wolf, the issue here is it's the most complex, it's the longest. And basically what happened is Brother Wolf blessed someone at birth. And this person was killed by Three Scars using venom from Sister Snake. And this venom is so potent that it blinded the ghost of the person that Brother Wolf blessed. So this person is essentially trapped because they can't see. And naturally the issue that he wants resolved is to unblind her ghost and let her rest peacefully. Our first step is to speak to Sister Snake on the Isla de la Muerte once again, who tells us that the ingredients for the curing balm is grumwort and ghost tears. And Scratch suggests that our best step is to speak to Vidima back on Skull Island to try and get these 2 coveted items. So we talk to Vidima, who tells us that she can get the grumwort while we go get the ghost tears on the Isle of Doom. We go all the way to the Isle of Doom, we get the ghost tears and come back, and she obviously in Pirate 101 she doesn't have the grumwort, but she tells us where we can find it. And that is with the Frog Father back in Jonatown, as he has the monopoly on the whole grumwort market. We talk to the Frog Father once again, and he tells us that it's actually kind of a coincidence that we come to him with grumwort issues, as his partner on the grumwort market, Joey Caro, took control of the supply and kind of fled from the operation. And so Frog Father gives us a little nudge. He's like, if you convince him the error of his ways, or if you just kill him, and you get me my grumwort back, I'll give you some, and you can be on your way. And of course, that's what we do. We find Joey on, I believe it's Flotsam. We find him, convince him that he's doing a bad thing. He's making a really bad decision, messing with the Frog Father. And, he's like, all right, I understand. You're right. Here's the grumwort. and we return the Frogfather with his Monopoly back in his hand, and then we are able to take our Grumwort back to Sister Snake, who makes the bomb to give to Brother Wolf. After pouring the bomb on the grave of the person that Three Scars killed, that Brother Wolf blessed, we speak to Brother Wolf, who tells us that we're not quite done yet, and we need to destroy the Black Raiders, the Blackstorm Raiders, and kill Three Scars, and that will finalize his appeasement. So we do all that, and we actually get a Blackstorm Raider to join us, as he's seen the error of the ways of Three Scars. And now with all this in mind, the three spirits pleased, the Three Scars is done, he can't harm anyone else, we go back to Elder Bluff, and we invoke the Thunderbird once again. After invoking the Thunderbird once again, the spirits appeased, she tells us the story of English Bill, the Duck of Death. And luckily, there is a puppet show for this. So let us go ahead. Where is it? Where is it? Here it is. Let us go and learn the story of the Duck of Death.
The great birds came to our skies from back east to make a new life here. Among them was William the Duck, who helped build their Cooper's Roost. William came to these skies seeking riches, but found little. He hoped to change that when another people followed the birds here, the dogs. The dogs brought with them their great engines and rails. Hungry for gold, they needed vast swaths of land for their constructs and their mines. William Duck won the lands for them. He led the soldiers who drove the bison from the Great Rock and forced his fellow birds from their farms. William took the dogs' ways as his own and was then known as English Bill. The dogs promised Bill great power and wealth, but he was deceived. The dogs spoke wicked lies. When the great engine of the dogs, named for the west wind, exploded, the dogs broke all their treaties with Bill. English Bill was left with nothing. He had sold his birthright for a pittance and learned the Zephyr engine had been built by liars and thieves. Rage consumed him. Bill bought a brace of pistols and took revenge on the traders and engine builders who cheated him. The dogs grew angry. Hunters from all corners of the spiral came to make English Bill suffer for his crimes. He fled to the world of shadows, the skies of Darkmoor. Bill found an evil spirit there from the before time, when there was no spiral. He sold his soul to it for the power to take his vengeance. English Bill is no more. All that remains is the Duck of Death, immortal, evil, and invulnerable to all harm. All but one. Silver is pure and shines even in darkness. Evil spirits fear it. Only blessed silver can harm him now. You will need silver bullets.
So that is the story of English Bill, and what we need is silver, and we also need a blessing. Also, it's pretty crazy that they just the puppet show had a mass shooting in it. That's crazy. English Bill bought some pistols, went into the tavern, and just started blasting everybody. That's a pretty dark thing to have in this game. I didn't really realize it as a kid, but yeah, that's pretty crazy. And then he sold his soul to this ancient spirit to be invulnerable to everything except for silver. But yeah. And it's not shown in the puppet show, but the dialogue after the puppet show, Thunderbird tells us that English Bill resides in Boot Hill, as we can see all the way over there. So that's where he's at, but we cannot get to him first. What we need is silver, and we must speak to the bison. So we speak to Silverhorn, who I don't know if it's a coincidence or it was purposeful that silver's in their name, but he tells us that the birds of Cooper's Roost actually dug up all of the silver. So our best shot will be at Cooper's Roost, and Bonnie Ann says that she remembers a cave back at Cooper's Roost, so that's where we're gonna go. Also, something I just realized, in the Thunderbird puppet show, there was a bounty hunter guy that looked like Dengar from Star Wars. I'll put that up on the screen, but I thought that was funny. That was my first time noticing that. But after entering the cave, we speak to Bat Masterson, who's the foreman of the mine, and he tells us that he'll give us all the silver we need if we could just clear out the cave, this cave behind him that's filled with blood bats. And while we're clearing these out from the blood bats, a chicken miner, not this one specifically, but one like him, thinks that we're there to take all the silver and all the resources that they're mining, and he ambushes us, and now we have the chicken miners on our back as well. And then we learn after beating him that he wanted the silver for himself. So we did Bat Masterson a favor there. We're not just killing his workers. He was trying to steal the profits. And so we exit the cave. We tell Bat Masterson that we freed all the blood bats. They shouldn't be in there no more. And then he gives us the silver we need. And naturally, we can't just use raw silver as a bullet. We need to get them forged and made into bullets, which is what this guy over here does for us. We give him the silver, Smitty here, we give him the silver, he smelts it down into bullets, and then we're off to the Free Ranger, and then English Bill. After clearing some more of these Darkmoor ships here, we land at Boot Hill with silver bullets and Free Ranger in hand, and we're ready to confront English Bill, the Duck of Death, for the final time. The scene that we come across is pretty surprising, to be honest. We see that English Bill, the Duck of Death, is working with none other than
what have we
Deacon,
here?
the Armada. The Armada has their hands in every pie, working with Santa Rana and Santa Pollo, and working with English Bill and Big Sky. I'm not going to show the full fight, but we do fight him here, and after we fight him,
This is it.
This is it. We use the basin to bless our bullets because we cannot forget about that fact. But once we finish the fight, English Bill concedes and he runs away to his ship. So this, I actually lied, this isn't the final time we fight him. That was a purposeful deceit. But the final time we fight him is on the ship, which I will show after this. Let's see if we get a drop here, actually. Nope, just a pan-fried banana. So as we see here, English Bill, he runs away to his ship, or actually portals away to his ship. But luckily there is a small little dinghy there we can use to get to his ship. And then once we fight him here, the threat is over, and we can return to Tonka to learn more about the original El Toro. Alright, let's see if we get a drop from this one. So this is unrelated to the story part, but there is 3 different instances where you can get English Bill's loot. And I've got nothing. It's on the ship, it's back here, and then it's also the first time you see him in the Silver Stallion. So with the conflict resolved, we speak to Tonka, who tells us that English Bill was hoping to use Mojo to speak to Don Rafael, El Toro's father's ghost, or the original El Toro. And coincidentally, this was going to be done in the mausoleum that is below Boot Hill here. I also don't know why I'm invincible, but we can quickly walk over to the mausoleum and continue with the next part. So we head into the mausoleum, we collect some items from Don Rafael's various chests, and we bring him out here, and Old Scratch does like what he did with Captain Gunn and summons the spirit to come forth and speak to us. And it's here that Rafael admits that he did something awful that he regrets in life, and that is when he adopted Don Rodrigo, the current El Toro. He also had his own daughter Carolina, and while he was teaching El Toro the ways of El Toro, he denied Carolina the opportunity to learn any of these feats and strategy and combat that he was teaching Don Rodrigo, the current El Toro. And during this time, Carolina and Don Rodrigo fell in love, and Don Rodrigo started to teach Carolina on their own time the things that Don Rafael was teaching Don Rodrigo. Through time, the current El Toro, Don Rodrigo, proposed to Carolina and wanted Don Rafael's blessing, and Rafael denied, said no, and kind of excluded himself from their lives and went away. Now, in order to get information about Captain Blood, Rafael asks that we return Carolina to Cool Ranch, as after that day, she stepped out of Cool Ranch and never returned. During all this, Tonka says that he actually knows where Carolina is, as he was there that day that everything went down. He tells us that he and his friends helped Carolina get to Skull Island, where she used her mastery of the sword and donned the name Mustang Sally. And also on a privateer, if you're caring about the privateer part, privateers recruit Tonka, which is pretty interesting. He's not the greatest companion, but it is kind of cool to have him as a story companion. And Raphael tells us that we need a signet, this wedding ring, this proposal ring, in order for Carolina to know that we are there with Don Raphael's word and on his blessing to return her to Santo Pollo. Upon getting the ring, we return to Skull Island and we speak to One-Eyed Jack in Flotsam. And that is actually where this book ends. It ends leading into what is Port Regal and that whole arc. But yeah, that's the end of Cool Ranch Part 1. It covers 2 books. This book was pretty long. Looking at my recording, it's been about 50 minutes. I don't know what it'll get cut down to, but yeah. I mean, I think this is probably one of my favorite books so far. Working with the spirits and working to combat English Bill is a really interesting story, and it's a very dark story that Pirate 101 sort of presents. So we start off Book 8 by speaking to One-Eyed Jack. We knew from the end of Book 7 that One-Eyed Jack was the only person that we knew that also knew who Sally was. So he's probably our best bet. And he says that he hasn't actually seen Sally in weeks because she's on some new top secret mission. And he tells us that the person who hired Sally, which was Roscoe Ratso of Scrimshaw. And so that's probably our next best lead. And as we're about to leave, One-Eyed Jack tells us that the Monkeesan government wants us dead because we incited the Civil War, and then also for the 1,000,000 bananas that we that we dropped with Don Quixote. We speak to Roscoe, and he reaffirms it's some sort of hush-hush top-secret government operation, and he tells us that her boss is in a Monkeesan flagship near a vortex. And so Monkeesan flagship, hush-hush top-secret, it can mean either one of 2 things. It's either Cortez in the Civil War, or it's the Monkeesan crown trying to kill us. Luckily, it's the former. It is actually Cortez that hired Sally to break someone out of prison, and Cortez promises us a reward if we help her, because he hasn't seen her in weeks either, so she has also been trapped in Fort Elena, the prison in Port Regal. Cortez tells us to go to the nearby island in the Tradewind Skyway, which is the Marleybone hideout where all those Marleybone guys are, and to speak to Bosun Munn, who tells us to speak to the Captain Dan. And he has a plan to get us into Port Regal, but he needs us to do a few things first. And if you've played Pirate 101, you know this section. It's the very long section. Oh, hi, horsey. It's the very long section with the, 10 ships, and then the 6 ships, and then the other ship, and then you have to kill the troggies in the sewers. It's basically that. That's the premise of this. He wants us to get food for his troops, clear out some troggies, defeat a ton of ships to get the attention of the Brass Monkey, Cowpersteal de Brass. Once we defeat all the ships and defeat all those troggies and mummies, we then have to beat the bosses of those troggies and mummies to sort of calm down the violence that's happening in the sewers. And then we face Count Prestillo de Brass for the first time. We beat him, and then he is our prisoner to get into Port Regal. And once we arrive in Port Regal, we take Brass to the governor of Port Regal and make our way over to Gilbert. Now, Gilbert understands we're here to find Sally, but offers employment in trying to recover a package first that they've been waiting on. And we talk to Rakshaw, who's this dude who oversees the package delivery, and says that he was robbed. So we go back to Sullivan and Gilbert, and they want us to help again and help with the delivery. So as we exit Sullivan and Gilbert's shop, Blind Mew actually stops us, and he gives us some intel for a gold. And he tells us that the thief was a Valencian unicorn, which I think is also pretty interesting. There's a Valencian in Port Regal who was stealing things. And it turns out that that guy is Iago. We find that out by speaking to Corcoran, who was the deliverer of the package, and he tells us to speak to Bill Bobstay in Scrimshaw to help find Deadeye and Iago. And Deadeye is Iago's boss. So Bill essentially tells us that we're going to have to convince Deadeye to give us Iago's location, which just means beat him up. And Deadeye tells us that, and Deadeye calls for a parlay so we don't kill him, and he tells us that Iago's hiding in a vortex in Port Regal. And then once we get there, we defeat Iago. And actually on a privateer, what's interesting is you can recruit Iago. Where is he at? Right here, Iago. Unicorn villain. He's a swashbuckler. He's pretty cool. He gets a few promotions. He's kind of nice. If he had more abilities, or if he had like Relentless, I think he'd be pretty good. But yeah, he's just a story companion you get for privateers. He doesn't have any dialogue though. And then we return to Sullivan and Gilbert. So Sullivan and Gilbert finally give us the information that we've been asking for about Sally, and they say that she visited a few weeks ago and in her effort to free someone from Fort Elena prison, she herself got imprisoned. And so we need to go to the person that she was working with, which was Catbeard. And later on in the story, we do get Catbeard. Everyone gets him, but this is Catbeard for reference. And so we go to him, and then Catbeard tells us that they've been trying to find and free Napoleon Gwyn, as he is in pirate101. And we actually have a puppet show for this. Let me fix the audio. So let's hear the story of... Yep, there's 3 parts. Let's hear the story of Napoleon Gwyn, part 1, 2, and 3.
Where to begin? Some say Napoleon Gwyn is the most dangerous mind in the spiral. I don't know about that, but I can tell you he is a military genius, and surprisingly short. Oh, but please don't tell him I said that. He has this thing about his height and wearing tall hats, and, you know what? Forget I said anything. You have been to Polaris, right? No? Oh my, well, it's a lovely place if you like glaciers, and penguins, and pickled herring.
So that's the first part, because once you do it in the quest, Catbeard gets sidetracked by the pickled herring.
Oh, yes, Napoleon Gwyn, military genius. Well, you do know that he managed to climb from shipping clerk to Emperor of Polaris in only 10 years. It's true. Granted, the Penguin Revolution helped, but that's still a very impressive track record. And once he became Emperor, oh my, that's when it turned scandalous. He rebuilt the Polarian Navy from the ground up and attacked all of his allies at once. Valencia, Marleybone, and Monquista. The greatest military powers in the spiral. How's that for ambition?
And that is part 2, and then here is part 3.
What's that? Oh, Napoleon. Well, he was betrayed, of course. Oh, I'm sorry. I assumed you knew the rest. Marleybone started a revolt in Napoleon's backyard, and Valencia unleashed that clockwork armada. They turned the tide. Napoleon was captured and imprisoned here, at Fort Elena. Fort Elena is also where they're holding our friend, Mustang Sally. And I have to say, it's an absolute beast of a prison. Thick walls, stout gates, huge guns, and an army of guards. Cortez and I intend to free Napoleon. It's a crazy idea, I know, but Cortez wants Napoleon to win his little civil war in Monquista, and as for me, well, my fee will keep me and Mr. Norrington in pickled herring for the rest of our days.
And then he gets sidetracked a little bit more by pickled herring. So essentially what's happening is Catbeard and Cortez are trying to free Napoleon from the prison so that Napoleon can act as a military tactician for Cortez's civil war. And Catbeard obviously doesn't really care about the civil war. He just wants the money, as any good pirate does. So Catbeard's plan to help us get into the fort is to start a war between Valencia and Marleybone, as they're both occupying forces in Port Regal. If you go around Port Regal, you see that there are Armada ships and an Armada fortress, as well as Marleybone ships and the Marleybone prison, and then obviously Port Regal itself is a Marleybone colonial town. To start this war between the two nations, we attack Marleybone ships and then steal the governor's daughter. And don't worry, she kind of consents to it. It's kind of weird. She's very positive about the experience and being taken. And then after that, we attack Armada ships and then sabotage the Armada fortress that's in the Port Regal Skyway. And so while we were at the Dreadnought, the Armada fortress, and sabotaging it, Marleybone actually captured and imprisoned an Armada general. So in response, the Armada sieged the fort. So there's this big battle going on while we sort of walk in, sneak in, and take our prisoners. And so when we go in, we first try to locate Catbeard's man on the inside named Benedict, and he gives us the key to all of the cells. And so we pass by Count Bastille de Brass, which is very funny, and then we find Sally and Napoleon. And something else is interesting is that we pass by Fool. After freeing Napoleon, we also have to get some of Napoleon's troops and right-hand man. And with all of our people freed, we then have to return to Catbeard. And so Catbeard's plan to resolve this war that we started between Marleybone and Valencia is to return the daughter of the governor and then bring Sally and Napoleon to Gortez. Now here's a little bit of foreshadowing here. Catbeard tells us that the war should be over soon because Marleybone has the advantage. But as we see later, once we get to Marleybone, that is not the case. But that's a little foreshadow spoiler for you there. And while we were returning the governor's daughter back to the governor, he tells us that in the siege of Fort Elena, Count Bastille de Brass actually escaped. So we should be on the lookout for that. And then finally, we can return to Gortez with our prisoners in hand. And he tells us that Napoleon will help his civil war. And then we tell Sally about what's been going on with Cool Ranch and her father and her lover. And that's kind of the end of Book 8. It seems a lot shorter when it's put into this format, but it does take quite a bit. There's a lot of ship battles, especially with the leading up to actually getting into Port Regal. But I mean, I think it's a fun area. There's definitely a lot of implications for the rest of the game when it comes to the Valencia and Marleybone War, and then also Gortez's Civil War and helping him out, which doesn't really get explored after he wins the Civil War. Spoiler. Book 9. How do we start Book 9? We return Sally to Santo Pollo and reunite her with Don Rodrigo, also known as El Toro, and he tells us that we need to find the Friar Cluck so that they can get married right away. We speak to Friar Cluck, who tells us that there's actually someone in the church that wants to speak to us, and once we go in, we see that it's Don Raphael's ghost, who can finally rest at peace now that his daughter and his adopted son are now bonded as they should have been many years ago. And he tells us what he knows about Captain Blood. He actually doesn't have a whole lot to tell us. He doesn't know his base or the map piece that we're talking about, but he does know that in his last battle that the crew mutinied Captain Blood, and they may know. So he directs us to Sly Winkham of Tumbleweed. Once we get to Tumbleweed, we try to find Sly in the nearby tavern, and the bartender there tells us that Sly is actually in the back room being attacked by the Waco gang. And more specifically, the Waco Kid, or Wacko Kid. And so we go in there, we fight them, and we let Sly know that El Toro sent us. Sly tells us he does know where Blood's lair is, but the way to Haunted Skyway is currently blocked right now by the Wild Bunch, which is part of that's the larger organization behind the Waco Kid and that Waco gang. And while me and Sly are talking shop and trying to make a plan to get past the Wild Bunch, a local kid, Timmy, chimes in saying that he knows how to stop them. And so Timmy tells us the story of the Magnificent Seven.
Back when I was little, this Skyway was no fit place for bird or beast. We're no law at all out here. And the Rangers wouldn't even show their faces. But that all changed when the Magnificent Seven came to town. They tamed this Skyway and made it safe for us settlers. Wyatt Earp was their leader, the greatest lawman Cool Ranch ever saw. After Wyatt cleaned up Cooper's roost with his fists, he gathered a band of heroes to follow him, each one a legend. There was Wild Bill Peacock. He was the best shot with a rifle there ever was. Except maybe for Miss Jane. That's Calamity Jane Canary to you. Jane can bullseye a silver dollar at 50 yards easy. There's Duck Holiday, the dapper deputy. They say Duck looks death in the face and laughs. And don't forget Buffalo Bill, stronger than an ox, meaner than a mountain lion. Then there's Bat Masterson. He's quiet as a shadow and a better tracker than a bloodhound. They say Bat's from Darkmoor, but his heart's in the right place. Last but not least, Billy the Kid. He was an outlaw till Wyatt showed him the error of his ways. He's fast, crazy fast, and a little crazy too. My pa told me all the stories. How the Seven beat Guacamole and the Red Mole gang, shot Saguaro Slint, caught Sam Bass, and rounded up all the Waltons. Nobody could stop them. The Seven tamed the Savage Skyways for years, but then they went their separate ways. I guess some of them didn't get along. But now, Tumbleweed's been taken over by the Wild Bunch. They're bad, bad folks, but I bet the Seven could whoop them without breaking a sweat.
So that is the story of the Magnificent Seven. We have the classic Wild Wild West gang stopping the other Wild Wild West gang. And Timmy says that Duck Holiday, the dapper duck man, still actually lives nearby in Tumbleweed. So we go to him, and Duck talks vaguely about Wyatt and saying that they all would never be in the same room again, but says if we can convince the others, he'll also join. And our first best bet is with Buffalo Bill, who is a gambling man. And that's what Sly tells us. Sly tells us that Buffalo Bill likes to gamble, and if we can wager something, he'll join us. And so we go to him, we 1v1 his prize fighter, who is Tyson, who Musketeers actually get him as well. So we 1v1 the prize fighter, and that convinces him to join back in the Magnificent Seven, and then he tells us to go to Cooper's Roost to find Bill and Calamity Jane, as they're a couple package. Once we talk to them in their bar, Jane says that she's down to do it, but Wild Bill is a little apprehensive. Then he changes his mind once Jane convinces him. And they tell us to find Bat Masterson, that Darkmoor bat guy, who is actually the manager of the silver mine in Cooper's Roost that we've actually interacted with a couple times before in earlier books. And he says that he will join the Magnificent Seven, but we need to find the strong box that has the miner's wages, and that was stolen. So we go and find that strong box, we return it to him, he can pay his workers, and then he joins us. And so at this point we have 5 of the Magnificent Seven. We have Duck Holiday, Wild Bill, Jane Calamity, Buffalo Bill, and Bat Masterson. And so the last person is Billy the Kid, who was hit, and it's revealed here that Wyatt died, that Wyatt passed away after the events of that puppet show. And Billy the Kid was actually affected by Wyatt's death very hard, and went to war with the Froggerales, and he was put in prison, so we had to free him. Bat Masterson suggests getting the box of dynamite by the docks that he was going to be using for the mines, and we go and raid this prison, this Froggerale prison in Santapoyo. Once we get him, we free him, and we are off back to Tumbleweed to speak to Doc Holiday, because we've assembled the Magnificent Seven. So once we get back to Tumbleweed, we actually don't see Duck Holiday there, but we see Timmy there, who tells us that Duck and Buffalo Bill went to Wyatt Chirp's place, his house on this island. And so we go there with the rest of the Magnificent Seven, and it's the first time in years that all of them are in the same room since Wyatt's passing. And a little argument does start, but then it's kind of qualmed. No one really gets heated or anything, and then the Magnificent Seven nominate us to be the 7th. Before we go to war with the Wild Bunch, we go to Wyatt's grave to pay our respects, and it's here that we are attacked by the Wild Bunch. Once we beat them all, we return to Tumbleweed and we return to Sly to start the Wild Bunch war. And for privateers, interestingly, we get a mercenary named Black Angus, who is also kind of an interesting companion. He gets a promotion. I think he's just getting one promotion, Bison Outlaw. And he's a pretty cool looking companion. I hope he gets reworked as well. But we recruit him for privateers, and then we're off to fight Buck Bronco. We head out to a cave. We have to fight Buck Bronco a couple times actually, and his recruits. And then we return to Sly. It tells us that while we were gone fighting Buck Bronco, the rest of the Wild Bunch actually invaded Tumbleweed and kidnapped Timmy. They kidnapped the child. And the old man Bronco, who is like the father figure of the entire Wild Bunch gang, he calls us out and tells that he's waiting for a final showdown at the old jailhouse. And so we wage war with all of them. It's the Magnificent Seven versus the Wild Bunch. And we go and fight. We fight these recruits. We fight a couple of them. And then it is the final showdown in the cave underneath the jailhouse. It's the 3 Broncos versus us and some of their recruits. And obviously we win that fight. We free Timmy. We return to Sly. And privateers actually recruit Jane and Bill, while other classes recruit other people. Privateers actually get 2 of the companions. So, and they're pretty decent. Jane gets Overwatch 3, True Grit 3, and Wild Bill gets Burst 2 and Tap and True Grit. So you could give them Burst 2, Tap 2, Grit 2, and they get a guaranteed crit hit with this Musketeer's Mastery. So they're not awful. They're definitely usable. So with the Wild Bunch conflict resolved, we can speak to Sly, and he gives us the information about his hideout. And he tells us that Blood's hideout was in the Motherlode mine in Haunted Skyway, but the key to get into the mine is held by the mutiny leader, Sabatini, who has settled in Fort McMurtry, which is the big fort in Haunted Skyway. And that is the end of Book 9. Surprisingly, I didn't expect this. I've been recording for 11 and a half minutes. I didn't think that Tumbleweed would be that short, because it seems like a lot goes down, but yeah, it's mostly just, it kind of returns to like this ground level where we just fight the Wild Bunch, and it's basically this group versus group, and obviously there's some weird things like Timmy getting kidnapped. But we do get a lot of good companions recruited on Privateer. You get Jane, you get Bill, you get Angus, you get Iago. So a lot of fun side companions that you can use. We are on Haunted Skyway, so we're dealing with the end of Cool Ranch, Captain Blood, Fort McMurtry, Sabatini, and all of that. So let us get right into it. So we head to Fort McMurtry and speak with the Colonel Church, and before we even get to talk about Sabatini and what we're there for, the Colonel tells us that we need to help him with his war against the ghost ships. So we go defeat like 6 of them, we come back to him, and he says that Sabatini ran out of town a week ago and says that he'll find out and tell us why, and in the meantime, we gotta go help some of his lieutenants with some problems that are going around the fort. So we speak to Lieutenant Masterson, who I believe is like a brother of Bat Masterson from the Magnificent Seven, and he wants us to ask some civilians and troops if there's been anyone suspicious nearby from a recent jailbreak that happened. And we learn of 2. There are 2 people that are acting a little suspicious after the jailbreak. The first is Weasley Jenkins, who is hidden nearby in an old mine shaft. Pretty simple, pretty easy. We just take him, bring him back. And the second is a little more difficult. It is Crazy Horn, who is a bison that escaped and is now hiding in a vortex at the other end of the Skyway. So we go find him, beat him, and then bring him back, and all's good. And then we return to Masterson. And also, interestingly, Jim Masterson, the lieutenant, actually joins us if you're a privateer. So we can see him right there. Pretty cool. He doesn't really get anything, unfortunately. He just gets Witch Hunter repos. He doesn't even get like a Jobu's Breath, kind of like Bat Masterson does. But moving on. We return to the Colonel Church, who tells us that he has learned a few things about Sabatini. He tells us that Sabatini is rumored to be holed up in the old abandoned church. We enter the church and see a scene of Captain Blood threatening Sabatini's life. Sabatini, in his final moments, calls out to us to look to the cards to find the sisters on the Islas de los Muertos. And then he is promptly taken by Blood, and then we are ambushed by Blood's troops. Now that is obviously our best lead, so we go to speak with Madame Esmeralda on Isla de los Muertos, who does a tarot card reading for us, and when you're there you can actually see Wizard 101 cards on the table, which is pretty fun. So our cards are Judgment Reversed, which refer to mutiny and distrust being the cause of our plight, with the Drowned Mariner, Captain Blood at its head, and holds the key that we seek. So to take it, we need Death. Not death as in kill him, but death as in the actual person, Death. And he will show us the way to beat Captain Blood. Now, Scratch tells us that the ravens act as Death's servant, kind of like Odin's birds, and if we feed them, they will show us the way. So we head to Santo Pollo, get some corn, return to feed the ravens on Isla de los Muertos, and they reveal Black Bart. Madame Nadia tells us that Black Bart is a vile killer who offends Death, so we must gather lost spirits of Bart in Haunted Skyway and take them to the graveyard, and Death will find us. We collect some of the lost souls in Haunted Skyway and head to the graveyard at the abandoned church. Black Bart finds us there and attacks us. We beat him, and then we speak with Death. Death explains to us the situation with the cards, and there is a fun little puppet show that we can watch about Death. So let's hear the story of Captain Blood by Death.
I don't know why Captain Blood wants to live forever. His life was never that great in the first place. All that violence and pillaging hardly seems worth the trouble. But he is, rather obsessed with immortality. And so, on his deathbed, he challenged me to a friendly game of cards. Yes, I know, I have a gambling problem. I'm getting help, all right? Look, I don't have to answer to you. It really is none of your business. Anyway, there we were playing cards. In the final hand, Blood raised the stakes and bet me his immortal soul. I had him. That's when he cheated. I played my cards, but Blood went to the bathroom and never came back. And he took his cards with him. So here we are, stuck in limbo. I can't collect Blood's soul because I haven't won the game. But I can't win the game because the game can't end. Blood's hand remains unplayed. He hasn't lost yet, you see. Very clever. It was a dreadful loophole, and of course I've had the rules changed, but I'm afraid it doesn't apply retroactively. Captain Blood is stuck between life and death, and I can't touch him. He cannot be killed, or even harmed, really, until our game is over. Captain Blood's cards must be played by his own hand on the table where my cards are still waiting.
So that's the current situation, and we're kind of at a stopping point here. Death tells us what needs to happen, but we don't have any sort of direction on where to get the cards, where to get the hand, where to do anything like that. So Ratbeard suggests that we speak with Sly Winkum back in Tumbleweed. Now, Sly actually tells us he was there at the card battle between Death and Captain Blood, and he suggests that we find Blood's separated hand that El Toro cut off. So we speak to El Toro, who tells us that his father fought him over Gold Creek. And actually, El Toro joins us. This is where El Toro joins us for the remainder of the game. He becomes a main story companion. And we go to retrieve Blood's hand from the bottom of the creek and return to Sly. And Sly tells us that the cards were scattered all over the town of Miranda, where the card game was held. Now, Miranda is the major dungeon of Cool Ranch Part 2, so we start by helping a ghost from these skeletal deputies, and then we head to the saloon and speak to the dealer, who we see in the puppet show, who directs us to where some of the cards are held. The first is held by a ghost in the general store who wants us to collect his prayer pages. The second is held by one of the mutineers who wants us to bury his fellow mutineers for the card. The third is held by Bosun Bud, who is a loyalist to Blood, so we have to fight him for the card. The fourth is held by the last living person in the town of Miranda, who just wants to escape, and then he gives us his card. And then the last card is dug up under from a nearby house. We use Blood's hand that we found from under the creek, as well as the cards that we got during our trip in Miranda, and play the cards and officialize Blood's loss. And then Blood teleports in and says that someone still has to kill him in order to finalize his death. So we brawl, we fight, and of course we come out on top. Death takes him, and we speak to the ghost of Sabatini, who tells us that we can now head to the Motherlode Mine, which is the place of all of Blood's riches. And Scratch suggests that we destroy some ghost ships on the way to rid the Skyway of evil. So we enter the mine, and the first thing we notice is a Mushu ship, identified to be the Santo Oro, which is Marco Polo's ship that he used to find El Dorado. But we see that the way is blocked off, so we need to get some dynamite and a mine track to clear the way. We blow up the path, and we are on our way down to the Santo Oro. Once we get to the bottom of the cave, we are ambushed by Deacon and the Armada. And with Deacon and the Armada defeated, we can retrieve the loot, which consists of a bottle for the ship itself, the gold, and a second piece of the map. And the last thing is a photo with all of the El Dorado crew. We take it to Argleston back in Cooper's Roost to see if he can identify anyone that's in the photo, but he can't, so we take it to Captain Avery in Skull Island. Avery solves Marco Polo's mystery and figures out that there are 7 pieces of the map and then also 7 people in the photo, so 1 piece per person. Avery says he'll talk to Catbeard, who was another person in the photo, and also the pirate that we saw in Port Regal, and he tells us to go to Mushu and find Egg Fu Young, who was also in the photo. And Avery tells us to find Zhu Ro, a tea house owner who may be able to help us find Egg Fu Young. And that is the end of Cool Ranch. That is the end of Book 10, and that is the start of Mushu, which is a beautiful, beautiful looking world in Pirate 101. Wizard 101 fans are in tears at how beautiful the Pirate 101 Mushu is. And this is also where a big difficulty spike in the game happens. The opponents in Mushu are a lot harder than they are in Cool Ranch Part 2. So if you're playing along, then you might have to, you know, think about your strategy, think about your companions, how you move them, how you use them. Book 11 covers the first half of Mushu, the Catan Skyway arc, the General So arc. So let us get right into it. So we start by speaking to Zhu in his tea house, who tells us that Egg is a prisoner of the Yakuza. And Zhu says he can help us gain an audience with the Yakuza if we help him get a jade statue back from a shipwreck. Zhu wants us to gift the statue to Soseweru so he can get a permit to sell tea. Zhu directs us to Shirokujo, who is with the Yakuza. Zhu requests that we get him some gold off of Marleybone's ships in return for his assistance, so, you know, paying him. And he tells us to go into a barrel in the back of his tea shop, and he'll take us to Catan Skyway. And he tells us that once we arrive, we need to speak to the Oyaban Shinjin. Shinjin says that in order to speak with Egg Foo Young, we must make ourselves useful and complete 3 tasks before we can speak. 1, the first thing, is to give the taxes back to the poor, which were stolen from the governor. We speak to the Shinjin's contact, Kenosuke. We beat the governor's lieutenants and give the tax money back to the poor people of Mushu. We return to the Oyaban Shinjin, and he gives us a pass that'll allow us to travel Mushu without being attacked, and gives us our second task, which is dealing with General So. We find Shinjin's contact in Sujimura village, Yuji, who will give us the required information. Yuji requests that we take down some of So's ships and take their rice to feed the village people for the winter. And next we must humiliate him by barging into the wedding of his loyal henchman Takeda Mumori. We steal a wedding invitation and get a forgery signature of it to get inside of the wedding. And to interrupt the wedding, we steal a bunch of gifts, we graffiti, and then we disrupt the play they're putting on. And after this, we fight some of the loyalists to General So, and then we escape. Humiliation successful, we return to the Yakuza cave, and the previously imprisoned Egg Foo Young is now waiting for us and reveals that he is the true Oyaban, and needed to be sure that he could trust us. He tells us that he can trust us with his piece of the map once we expose General So for his corruption to the common folk. And Egg directs us to the Constable Tatami of Sujimura village to find proof of So's treachery. Tatami tells us of the Inoshishi clan. We fight them and their chief, and we take an incriminating letter that was sent to them by General So. And also interestingly, the chief of the Inoshishi clan joins us.
What now?
Yeah, this guy. He joins us. Pretty decent. He gets hold the line and an epic strike. We also get the location of the true Inoshishi leader, not just a general, and we defeat him in a nearby cave. As we're defeating the leader, he says some cryptic things about the mayor of Hamamatsu Skyway, so we go to find him. We find him, and he says that the Inoshishi clan have stolen all of their ships and have retreated to Yamakai, and he requests that we warn the holy sage Wanmo of Yamakai. It is here that Wanmo tells us the story of Mushu's politics and the current situation, which of course, there is a puppet show. So let's watch that, narrated by Wanmo.
All of the people of Mushu respect the Emperor, offspring of the Spirit of the Sun. The Emperor's rule is wise and just. Not long ago, a necromancer came to Mushu, seeking to open a magical door at the heart of Mushu. A door to a world of dragons. When the Emperor refused him the Dragon Spire key, he was cursed into a deep, dark sleep from which he could not wake, and which grips him still. While the Emperor sleeps, evil men have risen in power and influence, and brought strife to the fair land of Mushu. Lord wars against vassal, and the order of things was overturned. The wheel of life is turning ever slower. Among the greatest of the evil men to turn against the Emperor was the one known as...
Now, the puppet show comes to an abrupt end because Wanmo is assassinated by ninja pigs. And before moving on, it's pretty interesting here, timeline-wise, that the Malistaire comes and curses the Emperor into a deep sleep, which is what happens in Wizard 101, Marleybone, and Mushu, that sort of time in the story. So Pirate 101's Mushu takes place during Wizard 101's Mushu, while the wizard is fighting the Onis and trying to bring back the Emperor. The pirate is trying to sabotage some of these rogue warlords who are trying to gain power, like General So. So yes, Wanmo is assassinated by ninja pigs, but luckily Egg Shen recognizes some of the smudges on Wanmo's robe as coming from the Cavern of Whispers. We go to the Cavern of Whispers and we defeat various lieutenants of the ninjas to get access to the Shadow Door. We find their shrine in the cavern and are ambushed, and then we find a letter saying that someone named Dr. No hired the ninjas to attack various people. The next name on the list is the Mayor Komatsu. We go to Komatsu to make sure he's not killed by ninja pigs, and after we defend him from the ninja pigs, he tells us that Dr. No is the right-hand man to General So. We return to Tatami, who tells us Egg Foo Young will know how to end this threat and find the Dr. No. We return to Egg, who tells us that No is aboard a ship in a nearby vortex, and we have to take him prisoner before taking on General So he's collateral. Upon capture, No reveals that a ninja took Egg Foo Young's piece of the map, and General So has control of it, planning to trade it to the Armada. So with this in mind, there's no time to lose. We race to So's castle to stop his plans once and for all. We defeat a bunch of enemies, we sabotage his armory, we storm his castle gates, defeat more of those people, we defeat his loyalist whose wedding that we ruined earlier in the book, and we are finally face to face with General So, and none other than Rook from the Armada is there. Once we arrived, we hear the tail end of their conversation, and Rook states that he has some business in Marleybone to attend to. It's a little bit of foreshadowing, and that he's off on his own, and then it's us and General So. We defeat General So by threatening his chicken, General So's chicken, and he tells us that the Armada took the piece of the map, but they will not be able to translate it. And he tells us to find the Imperial Governor in Hamamitsu Skyway. And that is what leads us into Book 11. This one is actually pretty damn short. When you play it, it's a lot longer because there's a lot of traveling and a lot of ship battles. But once it's put into this format, it's pretty short. It just covers General So, his defeat, and taking him from power. And also introduces us to the likes of Mu Manchu, who was trying to overtake the sleeping emperor in power. But yeah, as we get into book 12, which I think is a very fun book, it's the second half of Mushu. It covers the turtle balls and the protectors of the temples and Kaozu, things like that. We are finishing up Mushu. And so last time, the first half of Mushu is Catan Skyway and dealing with General So. And then the second half is collecting all the turtle balls and trying to summon Kaozu to get a translation of the map. Because General So told us at the end of Book 11 that even though the Armada does have the map piece, they don't know what it actually says, and they can't translate it, so we are heading to Kaozu to get it translated. So, I mean, this book is pretty extensive. I'll show my notes here. There's a lot to talk about, so I'm probably going to shorten it a little bit, because some information isn't really that necessary, but let's get through it. So this book starts off with talking to Governor Umaboshi in Hamamitsu, and he tells us that the only way to translate the map would be held in Subata Temple, and he gives us free passage to Subata and tells us to speak with Lord Shagatai. So Shagatai tells us that he'll help us, but first we need to get rid of the Amber Horde, which is like a clan of warriors who are fighting and trying to get power in Mushu because of the power vacuum, with the Emperor being asleep, as is in Wizard 101's Mushu. And so after we get rid of some of the Amber Horde ships, Shagatai tells us to seek out Librarian Quan Shi to find what we seek. Quan Shi tells us that the Amber Horde raided the library, and the only hope is with Shunzang the Wise, so any proof of someone being able to translate it is pretty much gone because of the Amber Horde, and it only exists in Shunzang's head. So Shunzang tells us that the map is marked with Taoist sorcery, but he's a Buddhist, so Buddhism, Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoist. And he tells us the father of Taoism is Kaozu, kind of like Sun Tzu. He tells us how Marco Polo studied his scrolls to make the map. And in order to speak to Kaozu, we're going to need to do what he did long ago with 4 other heroes, which is collect the turtle balls and summon the great turtle, which he now rests upon. And there is a puppet show for this. Yeah, here we go. Before we get any further, let's listen to Shunzeng the Wise tell us about Kaozu and the turtle balls.
When the mountains were but hills and the skies were still young, there was a sage, even wiser than I, Cao Tzu, father of Taoism. Cao Tzu wrote the scroll of secrets, full of ancient wisdom. When Marco Polo came to Mushu, he studied the scroll and used it to make his map. Cao Tzu dwells upon the celestial shrine, which sits upon the back of Maruzame, the great turtle that swims the skies of the higher world. The great turtle can only be summoned to this realm by throwing 5 turtle balls into the Eye of Harmony. No small task. I, Shunzang, once visited the celestial shrine. With me were 4 heroes: Monkey King, Pigsy, Friar Sand, and Dragon Prince. These mighty heroes helped me on my journey to the west when I discovered the teachings of the Muda and brought them back to Mushu. Each of these heroes carries 1 turtle ball. The last was entrusted to me. When our great quest was done, the celestial ministers sent the heroes to watch the 4 temples of the winds. They are still guarding them. Well, all but Monkey King, who got in some trouble and forced the ministers to drop a mountain on him.
So that kind of covers the entire structure of the second half of Mushu. We need to go to all the temples, we need to speak to all the protectors and get their turtle balls from them. So the first and probably the most difficult is with Monkey King. And as we saw in the puppet show, he got into some trouble and a mountain was dropped on him. So before heading off on our journey to the Temple of the South Wind, Shunzeng gives us a scroll that we're only supposed to read it if we set Monkey King free. And so once we go to the Temple of the South Wind, we find Monkey King under the mountain, imprisoned, and he tells us that if we set him free, we'll give him the turtle ball. His first strategy to get him out of the prison cell is to knock out his prison guard, Hattori Hanzo, but as a pig, and steal the key. Obviously, this doesn't work because Hattori has seen it coming. We're not the first person to try and break him out. And then Monkey King suggests that if we can get him back his golden staff, then he could break the prison cell and be free. Monkey King tells us that the Dragon King, separate from the Dragon Prince, the Dragon King is a different entity. Dragon Prince was one of the other guardians of the temples. So he tells us that the Dragon King has his golden staff. And so we go to visit him, who tells us that he is honor-bound to give us a wish if we collect his jade egg back from the Valley of the Titans. So we're doing a favor for a favor for a favor, essentially. We go to the Valley of the Titans and speak to Spare Chang, who introduces us to the threat of the Stormzilla that's ravaging the valley. And so now it's a favor for a favor for a favor for a favor. We need to stop the Stormzilla so that we can collect the jade egg, so that we can give it to the Dragon King, who can give us the golden staff to give to Monkey King so that we can get the turtle ball. After doing all that, we get the jade egg, return to the Dragon King. Dragon King gives us the golden staff. We return to Monkey King, who then frees himself from the cell. And then he tells us that his turtle ball rolled into a nearby cave. And we go into the cave, and obviously he betrayed us. He's there to fight us, but we fight him off and he runs away. And then we finally read the scroll that Shunzeng gave us, which tells us that we need to go back to him because he knows how to stop a free the Monkey King. So Shunzeng already knew that we were going to free the Monkey King because we're so predictable. Shunzeng's plan rests in a crown called the Crown of Command, which is an artifact that when it's on someone's head and we speak the words, then they are bound to our control, essentially. And so that's the plan. And in order to do that, we need to find Monkey King's armor, which is hidden underground in some ninja hideout, and then we need to put the Crown of Command inside his helmet so that when he puts his armor on, we can speak the command and then he's bound to us. So we put the Crown of Command in his armor, we return to Shunzeng and await Monkey King's presence, and obviously Monkey King does come to gloat to Shunzeng that he's free and has his armor now, but then we speak the commands out loud, and then Monkey King is under our control. And this is what allows us to recruit Monkey King. He's a very bad companion. I wish he was so much better. Maybe they'll do a rework of him, but this is him under our control now. And Monkey King tells us that he gave his turtle ball to a small little monkey guy that came to him while we were off busy getting his golden staff. And it's, funny enough, none other than Count Bastille de Brass. So last time we saw Count Bastille de Brass was in Port Regal. He was in prison. And then when we sacked Fort Elena to free Napoleon and Mustang Sally, we got word from the governor that Count Bastille also escaped. And so this is him coming back. And obviously we fight him and get the turtle ball. The next turtle ball is also a pretty decently long one. It is in the Temple of the North Wind. And there is an impenetrable fog blocking the way. And I wrote down, we have to do a load of bullshit to get access to it. And so there's basically the situation is the Amber Horde is occupying this territory, and we need to help find the troops that are resisting the Amber Horde forces a place to stay, which is we end up doing it in a big temple where there's a bunch of ghosts. So we need to get rid of the ghosts so that the resistance forces can occupy that building and have a place to stay. We also need to defeat some Amber Horde to like dwindle their forces, and then we finally speak to the Guardian of the Northwind, which is Pigsy, and Pigsy tells us that the Amber Horde had the turtle ball in a nearby tower. We go into the tower, beat them up, get the turtle ball, and then we're done. So that's the second turtle ball. It's a load of bullshit. It's a really annoying area because there's a lot of walking, there's no teleporters, but we end up getting the second turtle ball. Oh, and the thing that lets us go through the fog is by collecting 3 jade relics from various places in the area that the Amber Horde are occupying. So we also need to fight Amber Horde to get the relics to go through the fog to speak to Pigsy. Monkey King tells us that the next turtle ball is with Friar Sand, who was that big dude. And before we go do that, he tells us that we need to make a stop on Raven Island to get this pearl. So we get the pearl and we fight this witch lady, and then we're off to go to Friar Sand, who tells us that the only way he'll give us the turtle ball is if we beat him in combat, and he reveals that he's invincible when he's over water. But Monkey King, being a very nefarious and methodical and tricky kind of guy, he uses the pearl to freeze the water, so now it's ice, and now Friar Sand is vulnerable to attacks. After defeating Friar Sand for his turtle ball, we have 3 turtle balls, there's 2 left, and we speak to Friar Sand's like Lieutenant Wei Mi to see where the last 2 are, because Monkey King doesn't know where the last 2 are. Wei Mi says that there's one with the Dragon Prince, as predicted with the rest of the Temple Guardians having one, and there's also one at Hamakala Temple. So starting with the Dragon Prince, we go to the Temple of the West Wind, and the Dragon Prince tells us that he'll give us the turtle ball if we recover 3 relics of his that were stolen from him and stolen from his father. And so we go to this island where the relics are held, and we attack the Guardians. But the whole time that we're doing it, they're kind of being very passive, and they're saying like, "Whoa, why are you doing this? We're peaceful," things like that. And after we'd sacked them for the 3rd time, they finally tell us that we've been tricked, and they tell us to speak to their leader. And he tells us that the Dragon Prince was basically transformed into a Kirin, and someone else took over the Dragon Prince identity. So we go back to the Temple of the West Wind to fight the fake Dragon Prince, who reveals himself to be Lo Pan. So we fight him and then return to the leader of that island that we were sacking the relics from, and he tells us some ingredients to return the real Dragon Prince back to his Dragon Prince form. And so we do that, and then he gives us the 4th turtle ball. With the 4th turtle ball in hand, we go back to Shunzang the Wise in the Temple of Serenity on Subuda, who reinforces the idea that it is in Hamakala Temple, just like Wei Mi said. And he tells us that it's protected by a really evil entity. We go and beat up some ghosts. It's actually a pretty hard fight, but we go and beat it up, and then we get the 5th and final turtle ball. And with that being said, we summon the Great Turtle and have to face the 5 trials before we get to meet Kaozu. These 5 trials are basically a collection of boss fights that we have to do back to back to back. So there's like wood, metal, water, fire, and earth. Each one gets harder and harder, except for the last 2. I would say that the metal one is the hardest, and then I believe the water one is last. The water one's pretty easy. But after defeating all those bosses and getting permission to pass, we can speak to Kaozu finally. Kaozu reminisces on Marco Polo being his student and promises to teach us to read the symbols, but he tells us that we need all of the pieces of the map for it to be properly translated. So instead of giving us some sort of translation, he gives us a cryptic message to go to where it all began. And we deduce that is with Captain Avery back in Skull Island, who ends up having a clue on the next piece of the map. And that is where Book 12 ends, as well as Mushu. Mushu ends here. It's a very, very beautiful world. I'd say it's really decent into the content. I think I like the first half more than the second half, because I think General So is a pretty compelling villain, because there's a power vacuum in Mushu, and he's just trying to take that power. It's like a very selfish, very power-hungry villain. While the second half doesn't really have a villain, it's more just trying to complete our task. And I think the task is like, it's fine. We're collecting the turtle balls to summon the great turtle. It just feels like our conversation with Kaozu was just very underwhelming, because we have this grandiose idea of what Kaozu does and who he is. And once we get there, he's basically like, I mean, I'll tell you how to translate it, but you need all the pieces of the map. That's it. So, yeah. But next book, we start with Marleybone, and we go back to Capbeard. So that is it's a very interesting world that manifests the consequences of our actions from previous worlds and previous quest lines. Today we're looking at Book 13, which is the entirety of Marleybone. I don't know why they did it like this, but after Mushu, they just made every world just one book. So Book 13, Book 14, Book 15 covered the entire world. So we'll be covering the entirety of Marleybone. So we start off Book 13 by speaking to Captain Avery as Book 12 ended. And he tells us that he sent some crew to find Capbeard, but they came back with nothing. And of course, they didn't look inside the monster cave that we talked to Capbeard in Port Regal. So he tells us to, go do it ourselves. And we go to that cave and we find that he's not there. And we speak to Mr. Norrington, who is like Capbeard's second-hand mate. And he tells us that Capbeard was took prisoner by the Marleybonian dogs, and we need to go free him in Marleybone. Now, in order to get to Marleybone, we need a yellow windstone, which is something we don't have. But he tells us that there is one in Fort Bassett, and he tells us to speak to Gilbert and Sullivan on how to break into the fort. Gilbert and Sullivan tell us about Mr. Litton, who's a master locksmith, and Litton tells us that he'll help us if we convince Father Mackenzie, who is like the minister, the priest on Port Regal, to wed Litton and his fiancée. And then Father Mackenzie tells us that he'll do it if we rid the Church of Ghosts. So, rid the Church of Ghosts so that Father Mackenzie can wed Litton and his fiancée, who can help us break into Fort Bassett so that we can get the Windstone to go to Marleybone to save Capbeard. So we go into the fort. We fight through a lot of redcoats and soldiers. We blow up the vault, steal it, and run. We return to Gilbert and Sullivan, who tell us that we would need travel papers to get into Marleybone, and suggest that we head to the Marleybone Embassy in Mushu. They also tell us that once we land in Marleybone, we need to find Ned Land in the Admiral Benbow Tavern. So the Marleybone ambassador tells us that it's a hard no for the travel papers unless we get the Yakuza to agree to help the embassy provide tea to ships. So we speak to our contact at the Yakuza, Egg-Fu Young, and he tells us that he will do the treaty, except for there's one issue with another member of the Yakuza, Sato, who would essentially wrestle the leadership if Egg-Fu Young were to agree to these foreign relations with Marleybone. So we need to silence Sato, which means kill him. So we return to Egg-Fu Young, who gives us the tea, and then we return the tea to the ambassador, who then gives us the travel papers. And so we finally land in Marleybone in Westminster Skyway and find Ned Land. Ned informs us that Capbeard is in the glass prison, and they're only allowing him to speak to his lawyer Swidget, so we have to seek out Swidget. Swidget says if we can get his nephew on the right path, because he's kind of becoming a scoundrel and a pirate himself, then he'll get us in touch with Capbeard in the prison. This introduces us to our first gang of Marleybone with the Red Foxes. We beat up a lot of them, kind of like that. and we return Nigel Swidget to his father, and we get permission from Mr. Swidget to speak to Capbeard. Swidget tells us Capbeard's accusations from the Marleybone government, and it is the following. High treason and over 500 counts of smuggling. And as we see later, that's only a few of the of the accusations that are being thrown at Capbeard. But it gives us an idea that Capbeard is under strict watch from the Marleybone government. So Swidget sneaks us in, and we go to speak to Capbeard, who promises he'll give us his map piece if we let him out. And then this is where Swidget kind of comes up with his plan, and he tells us that right now there is an emergency decree for the Marleybonians as they're at war with the Armada, a war that we started. And so any able captain is able to fight for the Marleybonian military. So if us, as the pirate, can become an able captain for the Marleybone military, we can then take in Capbeard as one of our crew. So we go to the Admiralty foyer and find this Captain Otter guy outside, and he tells us that before we're even considered as a captain or to get an audience with the rest of them, we need to sink an Armada fortress. We do that real quick, and we come back to him, and we get an audience with the rest of the admirals. After talking to the admirals, they tell us that they need us, and we have our first task is to destroy Beachhead, which is a huge Armada fortress with a bunch of spokes and landings and weapon power and everything like that. We need to destroy it. And the admirals direct us to Engineer Conrad, who will help us in our sabotage of Beachhead. And this is where we recruit Gracie Conrad, who's an incredible companion all around, but for privateers, even more incredible. She gets a little mine. Later on, she gets a golem. She gets Hold and Witch Hunter, which is nice. Also Bladestorm for her guaranteed epic strike. But yeah. We meet her, we recruit her obviously, and then we collect some pure Gelganite, which is like off to the side on the dock, to assist in our sabotage of the Dreadnought Beachhead. So Beachhead is a multi-part dungeon. There's like 4 different spokes and then like the main battery. They're all pretty routine, like they do the same thing every time, except for one of the spokes where we see this like this big camera thing where we turn it on and Bishop is there speaking to Kane about his and Rook's progress in the Marleybone Armada War. And while we're listening, the real Bishop ambushes us with his troops. And then we fight him off, he runs away, and then once we do the 3rd spoke, he again ambushes us, we fight him, and then he runs off again. After defeating all the spokes and sabotaging them, we head to the main battery to finish our assault, setting up various explosives, and then we get ambushed by Bishop again. Fight him, he runs away again. Engineer Conrad tells us that everything is too fortified at the main battery, so we need to head deeper into engineering and flip a bunch of switches to build pressure in this like main cavity and then blow it up. And while we're doing this, we get again ambushed by Bishop, but this is the last time and he dies. And then we blow up the Dreadnought and escape, and then return to the admirals. We let the admirals know what we saw on Beachhead with Bishop talking to Kane about the plan from Rook. So basically what the Armada's plan is to keep Marleybone's focus on one side of the isle, while Rook and some of his other Armada forces come through Hamamitsu Skyway from the other side, so that Marleybone is forced to wage war on 2 fronts. This is kind of like what happened to like Nazi Germany, where they were fighting on 2 fronts with like Russian forces and like Great Britain and French and Polish forces or whatever. They were fighting at 2 fronts, and would ultimately lead to like losing a bunch of resources and men, troops, will to live, etc. The admirals tell us to head to the Isle of Fetch and aid the Kurgas with their battle. And this is also where Nelson, one of the admirals, tells us that he'll deal with Rook personally. So we speak to the captain on the Isle of Fetch, and he tells us that the Kurgas have actually mutinied and he lost contact with everyone else. So this guy was like standing on the docks, and he tells us that like he has no information on what's going on the inside. So we go in there, we speak to some of the captains that are there. We learn that the Kurgas kidnapped the brigadier into a nearby hotel, and we ambush that hotel. We free the captain, and then we kind of get an idea of what's going on. So the guy that we freed is named Kazinti Singh, who is actually someone we recruit as a privateer, not until later on. But we speak to this guy, and he tells us that the food is too good. And we're like, wait a minute, that you want food to be worse? And it's like, yes, we want the food to be worse so that the Kurgas get angry and fight the Armadas. And so we go on this huge quest line to make the food worse. It deals with like supply line and manufacturing and stuff like that. It consists of like Marmite, or like Marlebonian Vegemite kind of thing, or like Marmite. Basically, so yeah, we just do a big grocery list of things, dealing with supply line, manufacturing, etc., etc. And then we return to Gazinti Singh, who in return frees the Brigadier, and we get the plans to capture the North Isle from the Armada. So the Kurgas were planning to invade the North Isle to free it from the Armada, but then it's up to us now. And this is where we meet the Dragoons, the Armada Dragoons, those really big dudes that are kind of like Rook, but it's on a smaller scale. And then we fight them, we beat them up, we stop them from invading the Isle, return to the Kurgas, who will now be able to hold the Isle of Fetch in Marleybone's hands. And then we return to the Admiralty. Colonel Smeagol, who is one of the admirals in the Admiralty foyer, he tells us of Marleybone's new plan, which is to use war machines or robots. And this is also, on this questline is where Gracie Connery gets this war golem. So these little golem things are what the Marleybone is trying to use in this war effort. So obviously Marleybone didn't learn from the Great Polarian War, where Valencia started using Armada troops, and then that, turned on them and it created an authoritarian regime. So with that being said, we speak to Dr. Nation, who complains about the admirals, saying that he doesn't have the resources. So of course we have to get them from the radicals in the sewers, and the radicals are like the revolutionaries to the Marleybonian government. So we get some valves, some drums, some cylinders, and then Dr. Nation directs us over to Marcus Fox to double check the work and make sure that everything's all good. And this is where Marcus Fox, he says some really like classist and racist shit about Dr. Nation and some other Marleybonian people because they come from Albion while he's from Westminster Skyway. So we get an idea of like the racism and classism that's in Marleybone, which I mean we see it in Wizard 101s as well. Wizard 101 Marleybone is crazy with like the rich lady quest where you have to like defeat the sweepers because she thinks they're gonna do crimes. It's there's a ton of racism in Marleybone. And so, with that being said, Marcus tells us to get some Armada troops, like armor, so we can make dummies for the golems to test their like abilities on. Once we build the dummies, the golems then attack us by mistake. So we defeat them, and we go back to Marcus, we're like, dude, what the hell? And he tells us that the radicals took his brother, and in order to get his brother back, the radicals forced him to reprogram the golems to attack us. So they're trying to get back at us for stealing a bunch of their resources. And so we go to fight the radicals and learn of like their boss's location, and it's revealed that Marcus is actually the boss. Yo, big whoop. He reveals that he made up his brother because he just wanted to wait to kill us. We fight him, obviously, and return the plans to Dr. Nation. So everything is fine. The golems were actually working, but Marcus Fox was sabotaging it so that he could kill us. Upon returning to the Admiralty, the dogs tell us that Nelson hasn't returned from Rook's flagship, and so we need to go help him or avenge him. And this is where the final dungeon of Marleybone comes in. We raid the Victory, which is, I believe that's Admiral Nelson's ship, and we fight some Armada people, we fight some Dragoons, we fight some more Armada people, and then we fight Rook for the first time. This fight's decently hard because you have to protect Admiral Nelson, so like he can't die, but you only have to defeat Rook, which is nice. And then after finishing that battle, we grab Nelson and return to our ship so we can escape, and then we're attacked by Rook again. And then we beat him for real this time, and he's dead. And then we escape the wreck of the Victory, it blows up, and then we return to the Admiralty. It's here that we earn our commission, finally, after doing literally everything for the Marleybonian War that we started. And finally, we return to Catbeard for sentencing, where we can hopefully save him from immediate death. Mr. Swidget has no defense for Catbeard, but he tells the judge that killing Catbeard would be a huge military mistake, and he's a necessary for the Marleybonian Navy if they want to win this war. And we are an able-bodied captain who can take in Catbeard. And so we recruit Catbeard, and he tells us that the map piece he swore he would give us was actually Captain Gunn's map piece, so we've had it the entire time. But he tells us that he does know of another map piece, which is with Argos, who was the big Cyclops in the back of the photo that we saw a few books ago. And this is also where Catbeard tells us that Gortez won his civil war and has now become king of Monquista. And so Marleybone wraps up a lot of storylines. It wraps up the Armada Marleybone War, It wraps up Catbeard's arc of him becoming like a better person for seeing all of his crimes and giving it another chance to live. And then it also wraps up Gortez's civil war, which he won and became king. And that is the ending of book 13. It's a very loaded book because for some reason they decided to make the entire world one book. Started. This is book 14, the second to last book in arc 1, and it covers the entirety of Aquila. So we do have a lot to get through. So let's get started. So we start Aquila by first going to Gortez, who had just won his civil war with Monquista, and so now he controls all the vortexes and skyways that are under the Monquistan Empire's control. And he gives us permission to travel to Aquila, while he starts to tell us of a trouble within the Holy Church. And then the Queen Eleanor stops it before it becomes a whole thing, which I think it would have been cool to go more into that and develop that a little bit more, because I think Gortez is the strongest part of this game. But anyways, we land in Nova Aquila and go to speak to Autolycus. So we land in Nova Aquila and go to speak to Autolycus, who tells us that Argos' shield bearer was kidnapped by the vultures. So we go pick him up from the vultures, and his name is Nestor, tells us that it's been a few weeks since he's seen Argos and that we should consult the Oracle of Delphos. A guard of the Oracle tells us that the harpies nearby have been clouding the Oracle's judgment, so we need to clear those harpies out, which means just kill them. It's a little defeat and collect, and then we can return. And then we also need to collect some Timery as an offering to the Oracle. Upon our return, we speak to the Oracle, who tells us that we need to do ship combat first. We do that real quick, we come back, and the Oracle tells us that Argos is deep within darkness and she needs the Mirror of Apollo and the sacred water in Ilios. So the next few quests, a few hours of the game, is us essentially preparing and doing the Battle of Troy. Like the wooden horse, we basically build a wooden mouse to invade Troy and do a siege. We recruit General Eagles by creating a big feast and making some music for him that he loves, and we basically we gout him into joining the cause because he had a rivalry with Eaglemonon and didn't want to join the fight. And then to help them recover the golden egg, we needed to get a poet from the vultures. So we need to get the materials for the wooden mouse to invade Troy, and we go and collect that. We build the mouse and then assault the palace. And while we're assaulting it, we finally collect the water and return to the Oracle. The Oracle tells us that she sees Argos holding doors, but the doors are hidden and suggests that we venture beneath to speak to the serpent seers. Now the guard of the seers tells us that we need to sacrifice the memories of our first 5 years of life, which we accept and enter. The serpents answer with, "Where's Theseus?" which marks our next target, and we go to speak to Hocrates. Hawk tells us to go to the High Temple and ask a priest of Zeus. The priest tells us of the Minotaur and how Theseus led a party to fight it, but they never returned. The priest tells us to seek out Knossos, home of the labyrinth, as well as Daedalus, the inventor of the maze. It is from him that we'll get a key to enter the labyrinth and see what's going on with Theseus and the Minotaur. We land on Knossos, fighting a bunch of vultures and making our way to the gates. We go under, we fight some skeletons, some scorpions, some manticores, some serpents, and then we're under Knossos to find Argos. And what is he doing? He is holding the doors. It's interesting to note that the serpents were there under Knossos to find the Minotaur because of Troy. Because we sieged Troy and we're fighting a bunch of them, they wanted to get back at us and back at the Eagles by releasing the Minotaur upon the lands of Aquila. So Argos tells us that he was part of the squad led by Theseus, and now he's holding back the Minotaur with them still inside. And he tells us to find Hercules first. And Hercules is a Buccaneer companion that every class gets. There's also a new promotion for him as well that I decided to do the boss fight for, and I did a little review on that. And he also tells us that he needs a chain that's strong enough to hold the doors together. Argos tells us that Hercules was doing something for the Emperor, so that's probably our best bet to find a lead. We can't get audience with the Emperor without becoming a citizen, and we need a sponsor to do so. So we have to go through this process to get a sponsor. And first we ask Hocrates, who tells us to speak to Crassius, who will help us if we help him with a little thing first. And this is where we collect some incense off the birds in Achaea, and then recover a few relics from a nearby dungeon. And then we can get our sponsorship and then our citizenship. So we actually do get audience with the Emperor, and he tells us about Hercules' whereabouts. He doesn't really know and tells us to speak to Pandion the poet, who tells us to venture to the Isle of Talos. On Talos, we find Hercules searching for his belt, and we fight a bunch of Colossi and eventually find his belt in the temple of Hephaestus. And we can't enter the temple until we fight more Colossi and get their belts, and then put the belts in the door, and then we open the door, we fight more Colossi, and then we get his belt back. Hercules agrees to come with us, and we're off back to Argos. Hawk is a little bit brash and wants to fight the Minotaur, but we hold him back, and we enter the dungeon of the Minotaur. We fight the three sons. We fight them quite a bit. We fight each one once, and then once we're leaving the dungeon, we fight them all at once. And it's at the end of the dungeon that we trap the Minotaur underground with a gong. And we are able to make our escape and then find a chain that can hold the doors together. So Argos tells us that the Hydra and the chain around the neck of the Hydra is the only chain worthy enough of holding the doors of the Minotaur. And he says that he can unbind it, but we must consult the Oracle on how to beat the Hydra. And the same gatekeeper of the Oracle tells us that we need another offering. And in this instance, it is beaks from the nearby sky squids. So we collect those beaks, and then we return to the Oracle, and she tells us that we can temporarily subdue the Hydra by defeating the Ebon Head, and then kill it by using the Sacred Flame. So we speak to a high priest in Nova Aquila to obtain a firebrand for the Sacred Flame, and he tells us that he'll help us if we rid him of a problem with the serpents in Ilios. So we go do all that, a bunch of, yada yada, collecting defeats, and then with the firebrand in hand, we go to the Hydra cave and fight the Ebon Head. If you're curious, in my run, I actually did it flawlessly. I didn't lose a single companion, which I was honestly pretty proud of for doing it on a privateer. I didn't think that I'd be able to flawless it, but, I did. We collect the chain and return to Knossos. We finally get down to business with Argos, and Theseus, who we found in the maze of the Minotaur when we first went in, tells that he's gonna, go home and do his thing. And Argos says that we can sail to his home in Inoculum, and this is where Hercules joins us. We land in Inoculum, and Argos' cousin Polyphemus says that Ulysses attacked and fled, but he was able to wreck their ship, so there are some still stranded on the island, and they stole the map piece. Allegedly, they stole the map piece. So we go into a nearby cave on the island where we're ambushed by them until we fend them off, and they tell us that, they don't have the map piece, and Ulysses went off without them. And one of the soldiers tells us that Ulysses is on his way to Ithaca through Lastragon, so we make way, and we also recruit Argos as a privateer. And, he's not awful. He gets Relent Bladestorm in a guaranteed epic. If he gets a promotion or a rework, he could be really, really cool, which I would definitely think is a good thing for a companion like this. So we land at Lastragon and speak to a soldier that's just chilling on the docks, who tells us that they were making a stop to get some supplies, but they were attacked by the trolls. So we go to fight them a little bit to get some information, and we learn that the chieftain captured them, so we go all the way to his cave. We fight a bunch of trolls and then free the eagles that were trapped. One of the newly freed eagles tells us that Ulysses will be passing by Anthemusa, which is home of the Sirens. And this same eagle, Elpenor, gives us some wax for our ears to not get swayed as we land on the island. The Sirens tell us that they were blessed with irresistible voices, but a cure can be made from various ingredients. So we go make that cure, create it, and then return to the Sirens. The Sirens affirm that Ulysses is going through the dreaded passage to reach Ithaca, and we must tail him. We enter the passage and fight the huge Scylla, a four-headed beast, and then make our way to Ithaca. We land on Ithaca and look around for Ulysses when we're met with a dude who says that the suitors took over the grounds and Ulysses hasn't been seen. And we see a shepherd off in the distance looking a little sheepish and suspicious, so we go to ask him, and he tells us that Ulysses is hiding in a cave nearby. We go into that cave and we talk to Ulysses, who says that he has the map piece and will give it to us if we help him take back his home. He says he needs his bow, which was taken during the Battle of Troy and offered to Medusa. So we return to Daedalus, who tells us that we need special apples to fight Medusa, and it's Medea who holds them. We go to fight Medea, but she curses us, and Old Scratch is like really scared of this curse and says that she's all powerful. So we need to basically appease her and do what she wants so that we can get our apples to fight Medusa. Luckily for us, all Medea wants us to do to appease her and lift the curse is to fight Medusa and take back someone that she turned to stone. So we fight Medusa, we take the statue, and if you're curious, it's of Nigel Weathersfield, which I believe has some relation to Arthur Weathersfield of Wizard 101, that balance trainer. So We beat Medusa, take the statue back to Medea, who lifts the curse and gives us the bow, so we can give the bow to Ulysses so we can help him take his home back so that we can get the map piece. We ambush the suitors and win, obviously, and speak to Ulysses. He gives us the map piece, and then Bonnie Ann sees the stone nearby in his room with a bunch of markings on it. She recognizes that the runes on the Rosetta Stone are the same as the runes that are on the clockwork birds in Valencia. And Ulysses, for some reason, just lets us take it to Marleybone for translation. So we're back in Marleybone, and we take it to the Admiralty, who tells us to take it to Mycroft, who tells us to take it to Professor Challenger. And the professor couldn't make sense of what the Rosetta Stone says, so we need to consult Meowiarty. And Meowiarty, you know, in Wizard 101, he's a little bit of a goof and gaff. He's the villain of the world, but in Power 101, he has this aura about him that's very scary. It's very purposeful where he's at in what time. So he's in prison, but he's there because he wants to be there because of the war going on. And he reads us like a book. He knows that we're a pirate sent from Mycroft. He decodes the message fairly easily and tells us that it's a classical Aquilin epic, but some of the words are incorrect. And taking out the letters from the wrong words spells out a message. I know how to defeat Cain. Find me in Valencia. Seek Cagliostro. Signed, G. We return to Mycroft, who says that we'll need to sneak back into Valencia, and Capbeard suggests that Avery could give us a plan. And that is the entirety of Aquila. It is a mouthful to get through all the names and the locations of what happens, but, you know, the basic story of it is pretty fun. It's cool. We fight a bunch of mythical monsters, and we get a map piece out of it. And then now we are on to book 15, the final book, Valencia Part 2, which was not the original ending for the game, but they just put it out. And, you know, it's a little sloppy. It's not the best, but, you know, it's what we got. We are on book 15, the final book in the first arc, the original arc of the Cain saga. I will probably continue this with arc 2. I don't know when I'll start that, but think of it as a season 2 to this season 1. There's actually gameplay this time around. This is what you're seeing right now is my solo run of Cain on the privateer character with a majority of the build that will be in my privateer build video that will come a couple weeks after this video. So without further ado, let's get into the monster, the lore-filled behemoth that is Valencia Part 2. So we ended book 14 talking to Avery, and Avery says that Cagliostro is of high class, which means we'll need to get into the capital. Avery also says that the main routes are blocked from the war, so we'll need to use Avernus, which means returning to Gortez. Gortez argues that instead of sneaking into Valencia, we should march through Proud with a plan. Gortez suggests we use Don Armando, the Monquistan diplomat, as an ambassador of the Valencian court. With that plan settled, we are off to Valencia. Our first order of business is to get audience with the Valencian Majesty, but they've stopped a meeting with foreigners and only urgent petitions, so we must somehow cut in line. We speak to a nearby duke who's having a profit-sharing issue with another man, Don Lucci. We head to Lucci's villa to see what's going on. We land at Lucci's villa and are attacked by the guards. We take them down, as is expected, and talk to Don Lucci, who says that the cargo was stolen by pirates. But if we can instead get him some void fish, we can make up for it as they sell for a high price. We return the fish to Don, we get the money, we go back to the Duke, who gives us his placement in the king's audience now that his whole issue is resolved. We enter the court and not only see the Majesty, the king, but also Cain and Cain's queen. He calls us out and tries to get us detained. We fight the Armada for a few rounds and the king calms the situation down. Don Armando uses his fantastical words to charm us out of a predicament with Cain. The Queen and King of Valencia, the real King and Queen, say that we should continue these discussions later when everyone's all calmed down. We retire to our diplomatic quarters and meet these two conspirators who are already waiting for us, Landino and Contessa. They say they're from the Resistance. We tell them we're looking for Cagliostro, and Contessa tells us that Cagliostro is a dangerous name, always followed by the Commander Typhon. The Commander Typhon is a Armada heavy similar to Rook that we face in Marleybone, and is always following Cagliostro around. These discussions between Contessa, Landino, and us continue until Bonnie Ann notices a letter mysteriously on the table that wasn't put there by Landino or Contessa. We open the letter, and it obviously has come from Cagliostro, who tells us to meet him in the Manicotti Atrium in the tunnels. It is here that we recruit Contessa, as she can help navigate us through the tunnels. We enter the tunnel, seeing crabs and guinea pigs alike. And this is where Lucky Jack comments that when he was here previously, the guinea pigs lived in the city. Contessa here remarks that under Kane, they truly live beneath the city due to high tax and rent, when before it was more of a social class dynamic. Now it's become a financial class dynamic. We don't know where to go to the Manicotti atrium, so we have to beat up some crab thugs to get the directions. We enter the correct tunnel and come across some crabs, and then we meet Cagliostro. Cagliostro tells us that G, and if you recall in book 14, the end of book 14, G was the creator of the secret code that Meowie already deciphered for us. So Cagliostro tells us that G is actually a human named Gazpacho, and he's a prisoner, but Cagliostro has no idea where. But he does know who can tell us where he is, and that is Steed and the Circle of the Resistance. Cagliostro gives us a lead in Desdemona, who is heavily involved with the Resistance, and she can help us. As our conversation with Cagliostro comes to an end, Commander Typhon interrupts and attacks as expected. We defeat him, he's just yet another boss in our wake, and return to Landino, and he says that we should head to the royal court and see if anyone there knows anything about Desdemona, as Landino doesn't know much. Now, even though Contessa and Landino are part of the Resistance, the Circle of Resistance is a secret group within the Resistance, and their identities are fairly concealed and their whereabouts are unknown. We enter and see a Dame Mascherino who tells us that Desdemona has been confined to her villa and some drama of betrothment. So we head to her villa. We're able to trick the door guard into letting us in and speak to Desdemona. So Desdemona tells us that she'll help us get into the inner circle if we help her true love Bassanio, who has been accused of being a spy. But he's innocent. It's actually Desdemona who's the spy. She gives us some letters that would prove his innocence. We enter the halls of justice where he's being kept and speak to the bigwig there, who says that he cannot accept new evidence. Contessa suggests that we start at the bottom and speak to a clerk who suggests bribery with a fine Aquilan statue. We sink smuggler ships around the Valencia skyways, but none of them have any. But one tells us that Aquila seized all trade, so no statues. We return to the clerk who suggests going straight to the manufacturer of these statues, back to Aquila. We return to Aquila and speak to Hippocrates, who suggests Pygmalion, a local sculptor for the statue gift. Pig says he'll help us, obviously if we help him, by getting him the finest white marble and tools for his personal project. We give him the supplies and we get the statue in return. We go back to the halls of justice with our bribe. The bribe works and we free Bassanio and take him to Desdemona. With the favor for a favor fulfilled, Desdemona gives us the name Don Giovanni of Villa Trigante and gives us the password to meet him. We enter the villa and give the password to the majordomo, who tells us to head into the wine cellars when we're ambushed by the resistance forces, believing us to be a spy for fuel. After 2 rounds of fights with the resistance forces, Don Giovanni greets us and we talk back upstairs. And of course, Steed is there. Steed, if you don't remember, he is the resistance guy that we met in Valencia Part 1, way back when we were like level 10. And they tell us that Gazpacho is being held in the Clockworks, a factory of the Tortellini crab clan, where Armada soldiers are made. Steed tells us to find Nobartunello, who's the agent responsible for receiving Gazpacho's messages from the prison, and he can tell us how to get in. Nobartunello tells us Gazpacho is kept prisoner in the tall tower, and says we'll need a key, which fortunately for us, a rival crab gang, the Rigatonis, stole a master key in some gang violence for their own purposes. We go back to the tunnels and get the master key from the Rigatonis. Nobartunello gives us some architectural plans of the keep and tells us it's riddled with guards, forewarning us of the danger to come. We accept the risk and we finally say goodbye to Don Armando before heading out to the keep. We enter the keep, fight a bunch of crabs and Armada troops, and we finally find Gazpacho. We free him, and he needs to take a detour to collect some belongings. It's here we learn the origin of Kane and the method of how we can beat him. And there are a couple puppet shows we can watch here, so let us get into that.
My toys are the wonder of Valencia, the toast of the spire. Instead of relishing the joy my creations brought, I wanted them to make me rich. Greed, I see now, was my undoing. My partners and investors, the Tortellini family, asked me to make more practical devices. I listened. Instead of toys, I built automata, machines shaped like men, tireless servants who need no food or wages. The wealthy paid handsomely for them. In return for making them rich, the Tortellinis betrayed me. I was exiled from Valencia. In my hidden workshop, I forged a plan for revenge. I would build a new clockwork, but with a true mind and will. No mere servant. This machine would be an artist, with talents exceeding even my own. It took years, but at last my labor was done. The machine I built was the pinnacle of my artistry. When it stirred, I gave my creation a name, Cain. Cain would help me imagine and create even grander devices. We would drive the Tortellini to financial ruin, and I would have my revenge. I was a fool. I built Cain not for the sake of art, not to do good, but for revenge. My dark purpose was reflected in his dark soul. El Dorado was a dead city, but far from empty. Terrible mechanical sentinels remained, great giants made of solid gold. The things caught us by surprise and decimated the crew in an instant. Only a handful of us escaped. We cast off from the Golden Dock, but one of them managed to board the ship. We destroyed the terrible machine and barely escaped with our lives. While the others argued over their share of the gold, I claimed the broken pieces of the Guardian as my share. That machine, what a wonder it was.
Gaspacho tells us that Cain started to make his own armada troops, specializing them for his needs, like Deacon and Rook, who took Gaspacho prisoner. The belongings that Gaspacho must acquire are the heart of a golem from El Dorado. Gaspacho also reveals that he was on the crew to El Dorado. He's the one who took the picture, and used the mind of the golem to build Cain, which explains why he's so advanced. With this in hand, we plan the final battle to confront Cain at his spire. After escaping the keep, defeating more armada troops and crabs, we head to the docks where we once again see Nobertonelo, where we share our plan to confront Cain, and he wishes us luck, leaving us to our own vices. We land at the docks to see the clockworks already smashed. Trying to open the door, we see it's locked, when a voice from behind makes itself known. It's Fool. Fool reveals that Cain's plan of the machine to destroy and excavate the spiral, reforging it in his mind. And it's revealed that he was the one who cleared the path for us, and gives us the key to get inside. When we question him why would he do such a thing and betray Cain, Fool admits that he does not see himself in Cain's idea of perfection and is just trying to save himself. It's revealed here that Fool was Gaspacho's first attempt at a advanced clockwork, some would say the first iteration of Cain. With the doors unlocked, we enter the machine. We go up the elevator, and the first thing we see are the crystals from the Valley of the Gold Monkey, and Scratch senses a lot of bad mojo. Cain stands overhead on a platform, and Gaspacho pleads to him to take the heart and gain some humanity. Cain shoots the heart out of Gaspacho's hands, thanking him for making it easy, but he doesn't just stop there. He shoots Gaspacho and tells us that all is lost. He monologues and mogs on us that he discovered the map was based on some astronomical equations, and he decided to make his own. Using what he learned from Skull Island and Mushu, he spent 20 days doing what Marco Polo took 20 years to do. But he doesn't care for the gold. He cares for the means to rebuild himself, to shake himself from the hand of man that made him. It's in this monologue that he ambushes us, making his own escape as he permits the machine to self-destruct. We get through that first round of armada troops, we walk up the stairs to confront Cain, where the machine denies his request, fulfilling the cycle of sons stopping their fathers. With Cain's plan foiled, he escapes upstairs while we are left with the machine and a couple more armada troops. We defeat them, we go up to Cain, and this is where we fight Cain and his royal court. And this is the fight that you've been seeing in the background in this entire video. Obviously, we have to beat Cain. After Cain's defeat, we hear the crystals call to us. It's our parents. They're telling us to let the dream of El Dorado go, with gold meaning nothing. Scratch confirms that this is our real parents, and not some fakes. They've been set to peace in their real home. And all of our companions say their gracious thanks for us being their captain. And Bonnie Ann suggests that we tell Avery of the news. We return to Avery, and he tells us that he already knows that the news of the Armada is spreading, and it seems all is well, until we cut to a scene of the aftermath of the chessboard with the Queen awakening. She awakens and cut to black. And that's the end of book 15. It ends with the Queen reawakening, Kain dead, the Armada weakened, and yeah. What did they do with the Queen's awakening? If you've played Krokotopia, you'll know, but I don't know, maybe they'll do something different with it later. If you're not aware what they do with Queen in Arc 2, you'll see once I start to make that series what they do. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this series. It was really fun for me to make. It was fun to read all the dialogue and understand every story element and why things happen. And who knows, maybe I'll do this with side quests and read all the dialogue in every aspect of the game. But until then, I'll see you next time.